The flames roared higher than the barn itself, painting the Arizona night in hellish orange as Eliza Carrington stood between the inferno and the children huddled behind her. "Get back!" she screamed as another timber crashed down, sparks exploding like deadly fireworks. This wasn't just about a school anymore. This was war. And Silas Kane had just made it personal. But how did a Boston school teacher end up fighting for her life in the Wild West? Friends, settle in for a tale of courage, love, and the woman who refused to let evil win. I'm sharing this story from my studio here. Drop a comment about where you're watching from so I can see how far these frontier tales have traveled. Now, let me take you back to where it all began, to a merciless desert where death was closing in. The Arizona sun was a merciless executioner, and it had chosen Eliza Carrington as its next victim. Her boots, once sturdy leather from a Boston cobbler, had split open miles back, leaving her feet bleeding against the scorching sand. Each step was agony, each breath like swallowing fire. The purple mountains in the distance seemed to mock her, dancing and wavering in the heat mirages that turned the whole world into a cruel illusion. "Please," she whispered through cracked lips, though no one was there to hear. Her voice was barely more than a rasp, stolen by 3 days with only half a canteen of water. "Please, God, not here." Not like this. The stagecoach had left her behind at Grayson's stop, if you could even call that collection of abandoned buildings a stop. The driver, a grizzled man named Hank, had taken one look at her fever-flushed face and declared he wouldn't have no sick woman dying in his coach. She'd tried to explain it was just exhaustion from the journey, not cholera or typhoid, but fear made men cruel in these parts. They'd left her with her trunk and a half-hearted promise that another coach would be along in a day or two. That was 4 days ago. Grayson's stop had been a ghost town in the truest sense, empty buildings with doors hanging off hinges, windows staring like hollow eyes, and not a soul to be found. The well was dry. The single store had been ransacked years ago. Even the ravens had abandoned the place. So Eliza had made a choice that now seemed like madness. She'd started walking toward Cedar Springs, the mining town that was supposed to be her new beginning. 20 miles, the faded sign had promised. 20 miles through hell itself. Her mother's locket bounced against her chest with each stumbling step, the gold warm against her skin. Inside was a photograph of her parents on their wedding day, their faces young and hopeful. They'd died of scarlet fever just 2 years ago in Boston, leaving Eliza with nothing but debts and this locket. The teaching position in Cedar Springs had seemed like salvation, a chance to start over where no one knew about the Carrington family's fall from grace, where her father's failed business ventures couldn't follow her. "Stupid girl," she muttered to herself, the words taking precious moisture. Stupid, prideful girl. Pride. That's what had brought her here, really. Pride and desperation in equal measure. When the advertisement had appeared in the Boston Globe, school teacher wanted for growing mining community, room and board included, she'd seen it as divine providence. She'd sold everything, bought her passage west, and never looked back. Now she was going to die for that pride, alone in a desert that would swallow her whole and leave no trace. Her dress, once a respectable navy blue, was now bleached by sun and stained with sweat and dust. The fabric hung heavy on her frame, each fold a burden. She'd long ago abandoned her traveling jacket and most of her petticoats, leaving them like breadcrumbs on a trail no one would follow. Her bonnet provided little shelter from the sun that seemed to press down on her skull like a brand. A lizard skittered across her path, and Eliza watched it with envy. It belonged here. It understood this place. It wouldn't die of stupidity and thirst. Her knees buckled, and she caught herself with her hands, palms scraping against the burning ground. The pain shot up her arms, but it was distant, unimportant compared to the darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision. "Get up," she commanded herself. "Elizabeth Ann Carrington, you get up right now." But her body wouldn't obey. 28 years of life, and this was how it would end. No husband, no children, no legacy except a few students back in Boston who might remember her fondly for a year or two. She'd come west to matter, to build something, to prove that a woman alone could carve out a place in this world. Instead, she would become another cautionary tale, another fool who thought the frontier would be kind to dreamers. The ground was almost comfortable now, which she knew was a bad sign. When the desert started to feel welcoming, death was extending its hand. She pressed her cheek to the earth and thought she could hear her mother singing the old Irish lullabies from when Eliza was small and scared of thunderstorms. "Mo store," her mother used to whisper, "my treasure. Be brave, Mo store." "I tried, Mama," Eliza whispered to the sand. "I tried to be brave." The sun was getting lower, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Beautiful, really. If she had to die, at least the world was putting on a show for her departure. She closed her eyes, fingers clutching the locket, and prepared to let go. That's when she heard the hoofbeats. At first, she thought it was her heart, thundering its last desperate rhythm. But no. The sound was getting closer, accompanied by the jingle of spurs and the creak of leather. Her eyes flew open, but when she tried to call out, only a croak emerged. The rider appeared like something out of a fever dream, silhouetted against the dying light. The horse was massive, dark as midnight, and the man atop it seemed carved from the landscape itself, all lean strength and weathered confidence. He swung down from the saddle before the horse had fully stopped, landing with a grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. His boots kicked up dust as he strode toward her, and Eliza tried to focus on his face, but the sun behind him turned him into shadow and light. "Easy there," he said, and his voice was like cool water, deep and steady. "Easy now, ma'am. You're safe." Strong hands lifted her head, surprisingly gentle, and then, blessed relief, water touched her lips. Not too much, just a trickle, but it was the sweetest thing she'd ever tasted. "That's it," the voice encouraged. "Slow sips. You drink too fast, you'll make yourself sick." She managed to focus on his face then, and even through her delirium, she noticed the details. Weathered skin that spoke of years under this same killing sun, eyes the color of sage after rain, a jaw that looked like it had been chiseled from granite. He was perhaps 35, maybe 40, with premature silver threading through dark hair that needed cutting. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. "Save your voice," he said, but there was kindness in the command. "We need to get you out of this sun. Can you ride?" The question was almost laughable. She couldn't even stand, but she nodded anyway, that damnable pride still flickering somewhere deep inside. He made a sound that might have been amusement or respect. She couldn't tell which. Then, without ceremony, he scooped her up like she weighed nothing at all. The world spun sickeningly, and she instinctively pressed her face against his shoulder. He smelled of leather and sweat and something else, something clean like sage or cedar. "You're burning up," he muttered, settling her in front of him on the saddle. His arm came around her waist, holding her secure against his chest. "How long you been out here?" "Days," she managed. "The stagecoach. They left me." She felt him tense behind her. "At Grayson's stop?" "Those bastards. Pardon my language, ma'am. That place has been dead for 2 years. They knew that. Said I was sick." "You are sick." "Heat sick, but that's no reason to—" He cut himself off, and she could feel the anger radiating from him. "Never mind. We'll get you sorted. Ranch isn't far. Ranch not Cedar Springs, then." But she was too tired to care. She let herself lean back against him, let his strength keep her upright as the horse began to move. The rhythm was soothing, and she found herself drifting. "Stay awake," he commanded, giving her a gentle shake. "I know you're tired, but you need to stay awake a bit longer." "What's your name?" "Eliza," she whispered. "Eliza Carrington." "Jim Mercer," he replied. "Big Jim. Most folks call me, though I never much cared for the nickname. You got people expecting you somewhere, Miss Carrington?" "Mrs.?" she corrected automatically, then realized what she'd said. But it was easier to be a widow than a spinster out here. Safer, too. "Mrs. Carrington, I was supposed to teach. In Cedar Springs, Cedar Springs." There was something in his tone she couldn't interpret. "Well, Mrs. Carrington, I've got news for you." Cedar Springs dried up 6 months ago. Mine played out, and everyone scattered to the wind. The words hit her like physical blows. She'd spent everything to get here. She had nothing left, nowhere to go, no way to get back, even if she wanted to. The despair must have shown in the sound she made, because his arm tightened around her. "Hey now, none of that. he said, his voice gentler. We'll figure something out. Circle M takes care of folks in need, always has. Circle M? My ranch. Been in my family for 20 years. We've got plenty of room, and Rosa, that's my housekeeper, she'll get you back on your feet in no time. Woman's got a gift for healing and a tongue sharp enough to scare off death itself. Eliza wanted to protest, to maintain some shred of independence, but what choice did she have? She was entirely at this stranger's mercy, this Jim Mercer who'd appeared like something out of a dime novel to save her from certain death. The horse climbed a slight rise, and suddenly the landscape changed. Where there had been nothing but sand and scrub, she could see the green line of cottonwoods that meant water. Buildings appeared in the distance, a proper house with a pitched roof and real glass windows, a barn that looked like it could shelter half the county's livestock, various outbuildings and corrals spreading out like a small town unto itself. Welcome to the Circle M, Jim said, and there was unmistakable pride in his voice. Not much to look at, maybe, but it's home. To Eliza, it looked like paradise. Men emerged from various buildings as they approached, their faces curious and concerned. Jim called out orders in a voice that brooked no argument. Charlie, ride to town and fetch Doc Winters. Tell him it's urgent. Miguel, let Rosa know we've got a guest who needs tending. Tom, take Duchess here and give her a good rub-down. She's earned it today. The men scattered to their tasks without question, and Eliza realized that Big Jim Mercer wasn't just a rancher. He was clearly a man of some importance, someone used to being obeyed. A woman appeared on the porch of the main house, and even from a distance, Eliza could see she was formidable. Short and round, with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, she had her hands on her hips and a scowl that could peel paint. What foolishness have you brought home now, James Mercer? The woman called out in accented English. Mexican, Eliza thought. Found her in the desert, Rosa. Half dead from heat and thirst. She needs help. Rosa's demeanor changed instantly. The scowl disappeared, replaced by concern and efficiency. Bring her inside. Rapido. Maria, start heating water. Luis, fetch the medical supplies from the pantry. Jim dismounted carefully, keeping Eliza steady, then lifted her down. Her legs wouldn't hold her, but he seemed to expect that, sweeping her up again without comment. I can walk, she protested weakly. No, senora, you cannot, Rosa said firmly, leading the way into the house. And you will not try until I say you can. Entiendes? Eliza didn't understand the Spanish, but the tone was universal. This was a woman used to being obeyed, just like Jim. The house's interior was a revelation, cool and dim after the blazing sun, with thick adobe walls and heavy wooden beams. The furniture was simple but well made, speaking of comfort rather than luxury. Jim carried her up a flight of stairs, following Rosa down a hallway to a room that was bigger than her entire apartment had been in Boston. Put her on the bed, Rosa instructed, already pulling back the covers. Then out. This is women's work now. Rosa, say, out, Jim. You did good bringing her here, but now you go. Send Maria with the water and tell her to bring the blue bottle from my special cabinet. Jim set Eliza down gently on the bed, and she was startled when he briefly squeezed her hand. You're safe now, he said quietly. Rosa will take good care of you. Then he was gone, his boots echoing down the hallway, and Eliza was left with Rosa, who was already beginning to unbutton Eliza's ruined dress with practiced efficiency. Such a mess, Rosa muttered, though whether she meant the dress or Eliza herself wasn't clear. How long in the desert, senora? 3 days walking, I think. Maybe 4. I lost track. Rosa made a sound of disgust. And someone left you? Left you to die? The stagecoach driver. He thought I had fever. Men, Rosa spat the word like a curse. Cowards and fools, most of them. Not Jim, though. Jim is different. A young woman appeared with a pitcher of water and clean cloths. Rosa took them with a nod, then sent her for more supplies. With gentle but efficient hands, she began to clean the dirt and sweat from Eliza's skin, tisking over the sunburn and the blisters on her feet. You are lucky Jim found you, Rosa said, wringing out a cloth in cool water. He was not supposed to be out that way today. He was tracking a mountain cat that's been bothering the herd. Destiny, perhaps. Eliza wanted to respond, but exhaustion was pulling her under like a tide. The last thing she heard was Rosa's voice, softer now, almost maternal. Sleep, child. You are safe. The Circle M protects its own. When consciousness returned, it came slowly, like dawn breaking over mountains. First came the awareness of softness. She was lying on something impossibly soft after days of hard ground. Then came the coolness, blessed coolness instead of killing heat. Finally came the pain, her feet throbbing, her skin tight with sunburn, her throat still raw from thirst. Ah, she wakes, a voice said, and Eliza managed to open her eyes to find Rosa sitting beside the bed, working on some kind of embroidery. 3 days you sleep. We began to worry. 3 days? Eliza's voice came out as a croak. See, the doctor, he said your body needed time to heal from the ordeal. You were very close to death, Senora. Another few hours. Rosa shrugged eloquently. Eliza tried to sit up, but Rosa's hand on her shoulder stopped her. No, not yet. You drink first, eat something, then maybe you sit up. She helped Eliza sip water, then spooned some kind of broth into her mouth. It was simple fare, but it tasted like ambrosia. Mr. Mercer, Eliza managed between sips, I should thank him. Jim has been checking on you every few hours like a worried hen, Rosa said with a small smile. He will be glad to know you are awake. But first we talk, you and I. There was something in her tone that made Eliza wary. You told Jim you are a widow, Rosa said, and it wasn't a question. Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks. I have been taking care of you for 3 days, child. I know a woman who has borne children from one who has not. And there is no ring mark on your finger, though you clutch that locket like it holds your soul. Shame flooded through Eliza. She'd been caught in her lie before she'd even properly begun. I won't tell Jim, Rosa continued, but you should know that he is not a man who likes dishonesty. Better to be truthful from the start. A woman alone, unmarried, coming west to teach. Eliza tried to explain. It's safer to be a widow. More respectable. Rosa nodded slowly. This I understand. The world is not kind to women alone. But Jim, he respects courage more than convention. Remember that. Before Eliza could respond, there was a knock at the door. That will be him now, Rosa said, rising. He has the patience of a saint, that one, but 3 days is his limit. She opened the door, and Jim Mercer filled the doorway. He'd cleaned up since she'd last seen him, shaved, hair combed, wearing a fresh shirt, but he still had that quality of belonging to this land, of being carved from it. Mrs. Carrington, he said, and there was genuine warmth in his voice. Good to see you awake. You gave us all a scare. Mr. Mercer. She tried to sit up straighter, aware of how she must look, hair undoubtedly a mess, wearing what appeared to be a borrowed nightgown. I owe you my life. I don't know how to thank you. He waved off her thanks with clear discomfort. Anyone would have done the same. No, Rosa said firmly. They would not. The stagecoach driver proved that. Jim's jaw tightened at the reminder. I've had words with the stage company. The driver won't be leaving any more passengers to die. There was something dangerous in his tone, and Eliza realized that Big Jim Mercer was not a man to cross. I should leave as soon as I'm able, Eliza said. I've imposed enough. Leave for where? Jim asked bluntly. Cedar Springs is dead. The nearest town is Millbrook, and that's 40 miles north. You have people there? Family? Back east? Eliza's silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, Jim said, but not unkindly. He pulled up a chair and sat down, bringing himself to her eye level. Here's what I propose. The Circle M needs a teacher. A teacher? I've got 30 men working this ranch, and more than half can't read or write their own names. It's a problem when they can't read brands or bills of sale, can't write letters home. I've been thinking about hiring someone for a while now, but teachers don't exactly grow on trees out here. You're offering me a position? Room, board, and fair wages for teaching anyone on the ranch who wants to learn. Rosa's been after me about the Mexican children too, the Vaqueros families. They need education same as anyone. Eliza looked between Jim and Rosa, trying to understand if this was charity disguised as employment. Why? She asked finally. Jim seemed surprised by the question. Because you need work, and I need a teacher. Seems simple enough to me. Jim does not do charity, Rosa added, understanding Eliza's hesitation. If he offers work, it's because he needs work done. He is practical above all things. Think about it, Jim said, rising. No rush. Get your strength back first. But if you're interested, the offer stands. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. That locket you were holding when I found you, your husband's? The question caught her off guard. She saw Rosa's warning glance and made a split-second decision. My parents, she said quietly. They died 2 years ago. Scarlet fever. Jim nodded slowly. I'm sorry for your loss. Lost my own folks 10 years back. Drought year. This land can be cruel. Yes, Eliza agreed. It can be. But it can be good too, he added, if you give it a chance. If you're strong enough to meet it on its terms. Then he was gone, leaving Eliza with a sense that she'd just been offered more than a job. She'd been offered a chance at the life she'd come west to find, just not in the way she'd expected. He likes you, Rosa said after a moment. He doesn't know me. Jim knows people. It's how he survived out here, how he's built all this. He saw something in you, out there in the desert, something that made him bring you here instead of just taking you to town. What do you mean? Rosa returned to her embroidery, but there was a knowing smile on her face. Jim Mercer hasn't looked at a woman the way he looked at you in 5 years. Not since his Sarah died. He was married. See, childhood sweethearts. She died in childbirth, the baby too. Nearly broke him. He threw himself into the ranch, built it up to what you see now. But he's been alone too long. We all see it, but he doesn't let anyone close enough to matter. Rosa, I didn't come here looking for... I know, child, but the desert has a way of bringing people what they need, not always what they're looking for. Rest now. Tomorrow is soon enough to think about the future. Over the next days, Eliza grew stronger. She graduated from bed to a chair by the window where she could watch the life of the ranch unfold below. It was like watching a small town in constant motion. Men coming and going, cattle being moved, horses trained, repairs made. And at the center of it all was Jim Mercer, directing the orchestra of work with quiet authority. He visited her each evening, always properly chaperoned by Rosa, always respectful. They talked about books. He had a surprising collection for a ranch in the middle of nowhere. They talked about the ranch, about the challenges of raising cattle in this unforgiving land. They talked about everything except the growing awareness between them, the way their eyes would meet and hold a moment too long. A week after she woke, Eliza took her first walk outside. Jim insisted on accompanying her, offering his arm for support. The sun that had nearly killed her now felt gentle on her skin. The desert that had been her enemy now seemed almost beautiful in the morning light. It changes, doesn't it? Jim said, seeming to read her thoughts. The land. Once it's tested you and you've survived, it's different, like you've earned the right to find it beautiful. Is that what happened to you? He was quiet for a moment. My father brought us here when I was 15. I hated it, hated the heat, the dust, the isolation. Spent 2 years plotting how to get back east. Then one day, I was out checking fence lines and got caught in a sandstorm. Thought I was going to die, honestly. But I found shelter in a cave, waited it out, and when I emerged, the sunset was painting everything gold and red and purple. Most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. That's when I knew I belonged here. And your wife? Did she love it too? Jim's step faltered slightly. Sarah was born here. This land was in her blood from the start. She used to say the desert loved those who respected it. She respected it, but it took her anyway. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. But thank you. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached a small rise that gave a view of the entire ranch spread out below. So, Jim said, have you thought about my offer? Eliza had thought of little else. You don't even know if I can teach. You taught in Boston, didn't you? Yes, but that was children from good families, with books and slates and proper supplies. We can get supplies. As for good families, he gestured toward the ranch. These are good men, Mrs. Carrington. Hard-working, honest men who just never had the chance to learn. Same with the children. They deserve that chance, don't you think? Yes, Eliza said firmly. They do. So you'll take the position? She looked out over the Circle M, this unlikely sanctuary that had saved her life. She thought about her empty apartment in Boston, her meager savings spent on a journey to nowhere. She thought about Jim Mercer, this complicated man who'd built an empire in the desert, and now wanted to give his people the gift of education. Yes, she said. I'll take it. Jim's smile transformed his face, making him look years younger. Good. That's good. We'll set you up in the old foreman's cabin. It's small but comfortable and private. Rosa will help you get settled. When do I start? When you're ready. No rush. Though I should warn you, word's already gotten out that we have a teacher. The men are excited. Some of the women too. The wives want to learn alongside their husbands. How many students are we talking about? Maybe 20 to start? Could be more once word spreads to the other ranches. 20 students of varying ages and abilities, probably no standard supplies, certainly no curriculum. It should have been daunting. Instead, Eliza felt the first stirrings of excitement she'd had since leaving Boston. I'll need supplies, she said, her mind already working. Slates, chalk, primers, paper, if we can get it. Make a list. I'll send Charlie to Tucson for whatever you need. And a space to hold classes. We can use the main room of the bunkhouse for now. Eventually, maybe we build something proper, a real schoolhouse. The thought made her heart race. Mr. Mercer, Jim, this is very generous. It's practical, he corrected, but there was warmth in his eyes. Education is an investment. Educated workers are better workers, and educated citizens make better communities. You sound like you've thought about this a lot. Sarah was a teacher, he said quietly, before we married. She used to talk about starting a school here. Never got the chance. Understanding dawned. This wasn't just about the ranch, it was about fulfilling a dream that had died with his wife. Eliza felt the weight of that responsibility, but also the honor of it. I'll do my best to make her proud, Eliza said softly. Jim's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm, just for a moment, warm and calloused and strong. I believe you will, Mrs. Carrington. I believe you will. As they walked back toward the house, Eliza felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't the life she'd planned, wasn't the destination she'd bought a ticket for. But standing here in the morning sun, with the Circle M spread before her and Jim Mercer beside her, she thought maybe the desert had brought her exactly where she needed to be. The foreman's cabin was more than she'd expected. 2 rooms plus a small kitchen area with real windows and a covered porch that looked out toward the mountains. Rosa had already been there, evident in the fresh sheets on the bed, the wildflowers in a jar on the table, the fully stocked pantry. Rosa doesn't do anything halfway, Jim said, carrying in the last of Eliza's few salvaged belongings. She's adopted you, I'm afraid. There's no escaping her mothering now. I don't mind, Eliza said, running her fingers over the smooth wood of the table. It's been a long time since anyone mothered me. Well, prepare yourself. Rosa mothers with an iron fist and a sharp tongue, but a bigger heart you'll never find. He set down her trunk and straightened, suddenly seeming too large for the small space. They were alone for the first time since he'd found her in the desert, and the awareness of it hummed between them like a living thing. I should go, he said, but he didn't move. Yes, she agreed, but she didn't step away. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, and Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Hope. Maybe even the stirrings of something deeper. Then Jim cleared his throat and stepped back. I'll have the men set up the bunkhouse for classes. You just let me know when you're ready to start. Tomorrow, Eliza said impulsively. I'd like to start tomorrow. Jim's eyebrows rose. You sure? Doc Winters said you should take it easy for at least another week. I've been taking it easy for 10 days. I need to work, need to feel useful again. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Tomorrow it is, then. After the morning chores, say around 10, I'll make sure anyone who wants to learn is there. After he left, Eliza stood in her new home, her own space, earned by her own work, and felt tears prick her eyes. Not of sadness, but of relief. She'd traveled 2,000 miles, nearly died in the desert, lost everything she'd planned for, and somehow ended up exactly where she needed to be. That night, she sat on her porch and watched the sunset paint the desert in shades of fire. She could see why Jim had fallen in love with this land after that sandstorm. It was beautiful in a raw, honest way that demanded respect but rewarded courage. A figure on horseback appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the dying light, and she knew without seeing his face that it was Jim, checking the property as he did every evening. He raised his hand in a wave, and she waved back, a simple gesture that somehow felt like a promise. Tomorrow she would begin teaching. Tomorrow she would start building the life she'd come west to find. And maybe, just maybe, she'd found something else in this harsh, beautiful land, a chance at the kind of love she'd thought was only for other people, the lucky ones who hadn't spent their youth taking care of sick parents and managing failing businesses. The desert had tested her, nearly broken her, but as Rosa had said, it had brought her what she needed, even if it wasn't what she'd been looking for. Eliza Carrington, Boston spinster turned frontier teacher, went inside to prepare her first lessons, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The Circle M had saved her life, but more than that, it had given her a reason to live it. The next morning arrived with a nervous flutter in Eliza's stomach that reminded her of her first day teaching in Boston, except this time there was so much more at stake. She dressed carefully in her most conservative dress, one Rosa had managed to save and mend, and pinned her hair back severely, trying to project an air of authority she didn't quite feel. The main room of the bunkhouse had been transformed overnight. Tables and benches had appeared from somewhere, arranged in rough rows. Someone had even attempted to clean the windows, though years of dust and sun had rendered them permanently cloudy. A real slate board leaned against one wall, God knew where Jim had found it, and a box of supplies sat on what would serve as her desk. "You came," she said, unable to hide her surprise as nearly 30 people filed in, far more than the 20 Jim had predicted. There were the ranch hands she'd expected, weathered men with calloused hands and sun-damaged skin, looking uncomfortable and eager in equal measure. But there were also women, some with children on their hips, and a group of Mexican vaqueros standing uncertainly near the back as if unsure of their welcome. "Por favor, siéntense," Eliza said, gesturing to the empty benches, exhausting most of her limited Spanish. "Please, everyone sit wherever you're comfortable." Miguel, one of the vaqueros she'd seen around the ranch, translated for those who didn't understand English, and slowly the group settled into seats. The segregation was immediate and obvious. White ranch hands on one side, Mexican families on the other, with a careful gap between them like an unspoken border. Eliza stood at the front, her hands clasped to keep them from shaking, and looked at the expectant faces before her. These weren't the clean, well-fed children of Boston's merchant class. These were people who'd been denied education by circumstance, poverty, or prejudice, and they were trusting her to change that. "My name is Mrs. Carrington," she began, pleased when her voice came out steady, "and I'm here to teach anyone who wants to learn. I don't care where you're from, what language you speak at home, or how old you are. In this classroom, we're all students together." Tom, a grizzled hand who looked to be pushing 50, raised his hand tentatively. "Ma'am, some of us ain't never held a pencil before. You sure you can teach us?" "I'm sure I can try, Mr. "Just Tom, ma'am. Tom Wheeler." "Well, just Tom," she said with a small smile that drew chuckles from the group. "I once taught a boy in Boston who was convinced letters were tiny, insects trying to crawl off the page. If I could teach him to read, I can teach anyone." The tension in the room eased slightly. She picked up a piece of chalk, her fingers remembering the familiar weight of it, and turned to the board. "Let's start with something simple. Can anyone here write their name?" About a third of the hands went up, mostly from the women and younger men. Eliza nodded encouragingly. "Good. Those who can write will help those who can't. We learn together here." She wrote her own name on the board in clear, careful letters. "This is my name, Elizabeth Carrington, but you can call me Mrs. C if that's easier." She turned back to face them. "Now, who wants to learn to write theirs first?" After a moment's hesitation, a young Mexican boy, perhaps 7 years old, raised his hand. His mother tried to pull it down, whispering urgently in Spanish, but the boy stood up anyway. "I want to learn," he said in accented English. "What's your name?" Luis Delgado. Come on up, Luis. The boy walked to the front with a mixture of excitement and terror. Eliza knelt down to his level and put the chalk in his hand, covering it with her own to guide him. L, she said, making the shape. U-E-S, Luis. The letters were shaky, uneven, but they were there. Luis's face lit up like she'd given him gold. I did it, he exclaimed in Spanish, then remembered and repeated in English. I write my name. You certainly did, Eliza said warmly. Who's next? The ice broken, others began to volunteer. She worked with each one patiently, never showing frustration when someone needed multiple attempts, praising every small success. When Big Tom Wheeler finally managed a recognizable T, his weathered face split into a grin that took 20 years off his appearance. 2 hours passed in what felt like minutes. By the end, everyone could at least write the first letter of their name, and some had managed their full names. It was a small victory, but Eliza could see what it meant to them. These people had been told, directly or indirectly, that education wasn't for them. Now they were proving otherwise. Same time tomorrow? She asked as the session ended. The enthusiastic response was answer enough. As the students filed out, talking excitedly among themselves, Jim appeared in the doorway. He'd been watching, she realized, probably for some time. That was something, he said quietly. It's just a beginning. Best beginnings start small. He paused, studying her face. You're good at this. Natural teacher. They want to learn. That makes it easier. No, he disagreed. You made them feel like they could learn. There's a difference. Before she could respond, Rosa appeared with a basket. You did not eat breakfast, she scolded. And now it is past noon. You will make yourself sick again. I'm fine, Rosa. You will eat, Rosa interrupted, thrusting the basket at her. No arguments. Jim chuckled. Might as well give in. Rosa always wins these battles. They ended up eating on the porch of Eliza's cabin, thick sandwiches and cool lemonade that tasted like heaven after the morning's work. Jim stretched his long legs out, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him. Luis Delgado, he said after a while. His father works for me. Good man, one of my best with horses. He was proud today, watching his son. All parents want better for their children. Yes. Something shadowed passed over his face. They do. Eliza wanted to ask about the child he'd lost, but it felt too personal, too soon. Instead, she said, I need more supplies if we're going to continue. Paper especially, and more primers. Some of the women want to learn to read, not just write. Make your list. Charlie's going to Tucson end of the week. Jim, the expense, is mine to worry about, he cut her off gently. You just teach. That evening, as had become their routine, Jim stopped by during his rounds. They sat on her porch watching the sunset, a comfortable silence between them. But tonight there was something different in the air, a charge like the feeling before a storm. You're not who I expected, Jim said suddenly. What did you expect? When I found you in the desert, I thought... He paused, choosing his words carefully. I thought you were another Eastern woman who'd gotten in over her head, who'd go running back as soon as she could. But you're not running. I have nowhere to run to, Eliza reminded him. That's not why you're staying. She turned to look at him. In the dying light, his face was all plains and shadows, handsome in a rough-hewn way that had nothing to do with classical features and everything to do with strength and character. No, she admitted, it's not. The moment stretched between them, full of possibilities and complications. Then Jim stood abruptly. I should go. Early morning tomorrow. But he paused at the bottom of the porch steps, looking back at her. Eliza, he said, and it was the first time he'd used her given name. I'm glad you're staying. Then he was gone, leaving her with a racing heart and the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The days fell into a rhythm. Mornings were for teaching, afternoons for preparing lessons, and helping individual students who needed extra attention. Evenings were for Jim, though neither of them acknowledged that's what they were. The classroom grew. Word spread to neighboring ranches that the Circle M had a real teacher, and soon Eliza had nearly 40 students of various ages and abilities. She divided them into groups, using her more advanced students to help teach the beginners. creating a community of learning that transcended the usual social boundaries. Not everyone was happy about it. The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks into her teaching. She arrived at the bunkhouse to find a message scrawled on her board. Mexicans and whites don't mix. Stop now. Eliza stood staring at the words, anger building in her chest. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Miguel and several of the vaqueros. They'd seen the message too. Señora, Miguel said quietly, perhaps it would be better if we did not come. No, Eliza said firmly. Absolutely not. You have as much right to be here as anyone. But if there is trouble, then we'll face it together. She picked up a rag and wiped the board clean with deliberate strokes. When her students arrived, she didn't mention the message, but she made a point of pairing Mexican and white students together for exercises. If someone was going to try to divide her classroom, she would unite it even more firmly. That night, she told Jim about the message. His face darkened with anger. Any idea who? No, but Jim, I won't separate the classes. I won't. I'm not asking you to, he said. This is my ranch. Anyone who doesn't like how things are run here can find work elsewhere. It might not be one of your men. Could be someone from another ranch, someone who doesn't like what we're doing here. Jim's expression grew thoughtful. There's been talk in town. Some folks aren't happy about Mexicans being educated alongside whites. Say it gives them ideas above their station. Good, Eliza said fiercely. They should have ideas above their station. Education is the great equalizer. Not everyone sees it that way. Then they're wrong. Jim smiled slightly. That Boston fire coming out. I like it, but the harassment didn't stop. More messages appeared, each one nastier than the last. Someone put a dead rattlesnake on her porch. Her washing was torn from the line and trampled in the dirt. The breaking point came when someone set fire to the small shed where she stored her teaching supplies. Eliza woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of shouting. She ran outside to see flames consuming the shed, her precious books and slates inside. Men were already forming a bucket brigade, but it was too late. Everything was gone. She stood watching the flames, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't just the supplies, it was the maliciousness of it, the deliberate attempt to destroy what they were building. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and she knew without looking it was Jim. We'll get more supplies, he said quietly. That's not the point. I know. She turned in his arms, not caring who might see. Why? Why does teaching people to read and write threaten them so much? Because ignorance is control, Jim said. Keep people from reading. They can't read contracts, can't read laws, can't learn about their rights. Some folks have built their whole lives on keeping others down. You're threatening that. Good, she said fiercely. That's my girl, Jim murmured, then seemed to realize what he'd said. He started to step back, but Eliza caught his arms. Jim, this isn't the time, he said gently. You're upset. I'm not upset about the fire. Well, I am, but... She took a breath. I know what's happening between us. I know you feel it too. Eliza, I lied to you, she said in a rush, when I first came here. I'm not a widow. I've never been married. I'm just a spinster who came west because I had nowhere else to go. Jim was quiet for a long moment, and Eliza felt her heart sink. Then he laughed, actually laughed. Is that all? Rosa told me weeks ago. She what? Rosa knows everything that happens on this ranch. She also told me she thought you were perfect for me, but I figured that out on my own. Jim Mercer, are you courting me? Been trying to for weeks, he admitted, though having your shed burned down wasn't quite the romantic gesture I had in mind. Despite everything, Eliza found herself laughing. It bubbled up from somewhere deep inside, mixed with tears and exhaustion and relief. You're both fools, Rosa's voice came from behind them, standing here making cow eyes at each other while the shed burns. Come inside. I make coffee. As they followed Rosa to the main house, Jim kept his hand on Eliza's back, a protective gesture that felt like a claim. Several of the men noticed, and Eliza saw nods of approval. She was under Jim Mercer's protection now, officially. That would mean something. Over coffee in Rosa's kitchen, they made plans. Jim would send to Tucson for more supplies, better ones this time. They would build a proper schoolhouse, one that couldn't be burned easily, and they would find out who was behind the harassment. I have my suspicions, Jim said darkly. There's a man been sniffing around lately. Silas Kane. Says he's a land speculator from back east. What does he want? What all speculators want, to buy low and sell high. He's been trying to buy up water rights especially. But what does that have to do with my school? Educated people are harder to cheat, Rosa said bluntly. If the Mexican families can read contracts, they won't sign away their land for nothing. You think he's behind this? Can't prove it, Jim admitted. Yet. The next day, despite everything, Eliza held classes in the main house. Rosa had insisted, clearing out the big parlor that was rarely used. It was actually better than the bunkhouse. More light, more space, and the message was clear. The school had the full support of the Circle M's owner. Tom Wheeler was the first to arrive, earlier than usual. Mrs. C, he said, hat in hand, I wanted to say, well, the boys and I, we're real sorry about what happened. It ain't right. Thank you, Tom. Thing is, we've been talking. Those of us who are learning, we're grateful, real grateful. And we figure maybe we ought to show it. Before Eliza could ask what he meant, more students began arriving, but they weren't empty-handed. Miguel carried lumber. The Watson brothers brought nails and hammers. The women had fabric and other supplies. What is this? Eliza asked, overwhelmed. We're building you a proper schoolhouse, Tom announced. A real one. Mr. Jim's providing the heavy materials, but we're doing the work. All of us. Together, Miguel added firmly, looking at the white ranch hands. We build together. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know what to say. Don't say nothing, Tom replied gruffly. Just keep teaching us to read. The schoolhouse raising became an event. For 3 days, the entire ranch worked together. The Mexican and white families labored side by side, sharing tools, sharing water, sharing jokes that transcended language barriers. The children ran between the workers, fetching and carrying, their laughter bright as birdsong. Jim worked alongside his men, shirt sleeves rolled up, sweat glistening on his skin. More than once, Eliza caught herself staring, and more than once, she caught him staring back. On the second day, Silas Kane appeared. He was everything Jim wasn't. Soft where Jim was hard, pale where Jim was sunbrowned, calculating where Jim was straightforward. He rode up on an expensive horse, his clothes too fine for the desert, his smile never reaching his eyes. Mr. Mercer, he called out, ignoring everyone else. I heard you were building something. Thought I'd come see. Schoolhouse, Jim said shortly, not stopping his work. How progressive. Kane's tone dripped condescension. Though one wonders if it's wise, teaching certain elements to read gives them ideas. Everyone should have ideas, Eliza said, stepping forward. Kane's eyes slid to her dismissively. You must be the teacher I've heard about. The one from Boston who's stirring things up. I'm teaching people to read and write. If that's stirring things up, then yes. Pretty little thing like you should be careful, Kane said, and there was something ugly in his smile. Accidents happen out here. Why, just the other night, someone's shed caught fire. Jim stepped between them, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. That sound like a threat to you, Mrs. Carrington? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. It does indeed, Mr. Mercer. Sounded like one to me, too. Jim took a step toward Kane. Here's the thing, Kane. This is my land. These are my people, and this lady is under my protection. You threaten any of that again, and you and I will have a problem. Now see here. No, you see. Jim's voice was like iron. I know what you're after. You think if you can drive out the Mexican families, scare them into selling cheap, you can control the water rights for the whole valley. But it's not going to happen. Kane's mask slipped for a moment, revealing something vicious underneath. You're making a mistake, Mercer. I have powerful friends. So do I. The difference is, mine are standing right here, ready to back me up. Yours are 1,000 miles away counting their money. Kane looked around at the assembled workers, all of whom had stopped to watch the confrontation. Mexican and white, they stood together, tools in hand, faces hard. It was a clear message. Threaten one of them, threaten all of them. This isn't over, Kane said finally. Yes, Jim said firmly. It is. Get off my land. Don't come back. Kane wheeled his horse around and galloped off, dust billowing in his wake. Well, Tom Wheeler said into the silence that followed. That was interesting. Everyone laughed, the tension breaking, and work resumed, but Jim pulled Eliza aside. He's not going to give up, he warned. Men like Kane don't like being thwarted. Then we'll be ready for him. We? I'm not running, Jim. This is my home now. These are my students. I'll fight for them. Jim cupped her face in his calloused hands. You're magnificent. You know that. Mr. Mercer, she said, very aware they were in public. People are watching. Let them, he said, and kissed her. It wasn't a long kiss or particularly passionate given their audience, but it was a declaration. When they broke apart, there were cheers and whistles from the workers. About time, Rosa called out, and everyone laughed. The schoolhouse was finished on the third day. It wasn't large, one room with windows on both sides for light and air, but it was solid and real and theirs. The students had carved their names into a beam that ran along the front, a permanent record of who had built this place. It's perfect, Eliza said, standing in the doorway. It's a beginning, Jim corrected. Someday we'll build a bigger one, maybe add a library, a meeting hall, a whole town. Why not? Every town starts somewhere. That night, they held a celebration. The Mexican families brought food, tamales and beans and rice, fragrant with spices. The ranch hands contributed what they could, mostly whiskey that Jim pretended not to notice. Someone brought out a fiddle, someone else a guitar, and soon there was dancing. Eliza found herself passed from partner to partner, dancing with Tom Wheeler, who apologized for stepping on her feet, with Miguel, who moved with surprising grace, with young Luis, who barely came up to her waist, but was determined to lead. Finally, Jim claimed her for a waltz. The music was wrong for it, but he adapted, leading her in a modified version that fit the frontier fiddle. "Where did you learn to dance?" she asked, surprised by his skill. "Sarah taught me," he said, and for once mentioning his late wife didn't bring shadows to his eyes. She said every man should know how to dance with his wife properly. "Jim, I know we've only known each other a short time," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "And I know you came here for a different life. But Eliza, I love you too," she said simply. He stumbled, nearly stepping on her feet. "You do?" "Jim Mercer, you saved my life, gave me a purpose, stood by me against threats and harassment. You built me a schoolhouse. How could I not love you?" "Eliza Carrington, would you, if you'd consider—" "Yes, I haven't asked yet." "Then ask." He stopped dancing, right there in the middle of everyone, and dropped to one knee. The music stopped, conversation ceased, and suddenly they were the center of attention. "Eliza Carrington," Jim said, his voice carrying clearly. "You came into my life like a desert storm, unexpected and transformative. You've brought learning to this place, unity to people who were divided, and light to a heart I thought would stay dark forever. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Eliza said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, absolutely yes." The celebration that followed was loud enough to be heard in Tucson, but even in the joy of the moment, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that Kane wouldn't give up so easily. She was right. 3 nights later, she woke to the sound of horses, many horses. She looked out her window to see torches, dozens of them, surrounding the schoolhouse. "No," she breathed, grabbing her robe and running outside. But Jim and his men were already there, armed and ready. They'd been expecting this. "Kane," Jim called out to the man on the lead horse, "I told you not to come back." "You can't stop progress, Mercer," Kane called back. "This valley needs development, not some foolish experiment in educating savages." "The only savage I see is you," Jim replied. "Now get off my land before someone gets hurt. You're outnumbered 3-1. Maybe, but we're defending our home. That makes us worth 10 of your hired thugs." It was a standoff, torches flickering in the darkness, hands hovering near weapons. Then Eliza stepped forward. "Mr. Kane," she called out, her teacher's voice carrying with authority, "you want to burn down a schoolhouse, a place where children learn to read and write. Is that really the legacy you want?" Is that what your powerful friends back east would approve of? Stay out of this, woman. No. She moved to stand beside Jim. You see, I wrote to those friends of yours. The newspapers, too. They're very interested in the story of a Boston teacher bringing education to the frontier. How do you think they'll react when they hear their associate burned down a schoolhouse full of children's primers? It was a bluff. She hadn't written to anyone yet, but Kane didn't know that. You're lying. The Boston Globe, the New York Times, Harper's Weekly, she listed, remembering the publications from her teaching days. They love a good story about frontier justice, especially when it involves a villain trying to stop children from learning to read. Kane's men were shifting uncomfortably. Burning down a ranch building in a dispute was one thing, burning down a schoolhouse was another. That was the kind of thing that got you hunted by federal marshals. This isn't over, Kane said finally, but the threat sounded hollow. Yes, it is, Jim said, because if you come near this ranch, this school, or any of my people again, I won't bother with warnings. I'll come for you directly. Kane wheeled his horse around and rode off, his men following reluctantly. Several looked back at the schoolhouse with what might have been shame. That was brilliant, Jim said, pulling Eliza close. The newspapers. I'll write to them tomorrow, she said. Make the lie true. A story about frontier education might actually interest them. Remind me never to play poker with you. They stood together watching the torches disappear into the darkness, knowing this was just one battle in what might be a long war. But they'd won this round, and the schoolhouse still stood. We should post guards, Jim said. Already done, boss, Tom Wheeler said, emerging from the shadows with a rifle. The boys and I worked out shifts. Nobody's burning down our school. Our school. The words warmed Eliza's heart. Over the next weeks, Kane tried other tactics. He filed legal challenges to the land claims of several Mexican families. He spread rumors in town that the Circle M was harboring criminals. He even tried to bribe some of Jim's hands to sabotage the ranch. But something had changed the night of the schoolhouse raising. The community that had formed around the school was stronger than Kane's money and threats. The Mexican families and white ranchers stood together, sharing information, resources, and support, and the school thrived. Every day more students arrived. Some traveled hours just to attend. Eliza started teaching evening classes for those who worked during the day. She taught English to Spanish speakers and Spanish to English speakers, creating bridges of language and understanding. One particularly hot afternoon, she was teaching arithmetic to a mixed group of children when a shadow fell across the doorway. She looked up to see a well-dressed woman she didn't recognize, accompanied by an older gentleman with an official-looking bearing. Mrs. Carrington? The woman said. My name is Mrs. Eleanor Whitman. I'm from the Territorial Education Board. Eliza's heart sank. This had to be Kane's doing. Some official challenge to her credentials or the school's legitimacy. How can I help you? She asked carefully. We received several letters about your school here, Mrs. S. Whitman said, entering the classroom and looking around with interest. Both complaints and commendations. We've come to investigate. I see. No, I don't think you do. Mrs. Whitman smiled. The complaints were clearly motivated by prejudice and contained no substantive issues. The commendations, however, were remarkable. Parents writing about children who've learned to read in weeks, ranchers able to manage their own books for the first time, Mexican families being included in education alongside white families. She paused, studying the classroom where Luis Delgado was helping Tom Wheeler with his letters, where the Watson brothers' sister was teaching Spanish words to a group of younger children. This is exactly what the territory needs, Mrs. Whitman continued. Integration, education, progress. We'd like to officially recognize the Circle M school and provide funding for supplies and possibly another teacher. Eliza sat down hard, overwhelmed. Funding? The territory is desperate for educated citizens, the gentleman, who introduced himself as Judge Brennan, explained. What you're doing here is a model we'd like to replicate elsewhere. This is Jim Mercer's doing as much as mine, Eliza said. He provided the space, the supplies, the protection. Then Mr. Mercer is exactly the kind of citizen leader we need, Judge Brennan said. Is he available? Jim arrived within minutes, summoned by an excited Luis. He listened to the official's proposal with growing amazement. You want to make this an official territorial school? He asked. More than that, Mrs. Whitman said. We want to make it a model. Bring other teachers here to train, show them how to create integrated classrooms. The federal government is very interested in civilizing the frontier, Mr. Mercer. Education is key to that. What about Kane? Jim asked bluntly. He's not going to like this. Judge Brennan's expression hardened. Mr. Kane is about to discover that his influence has limits. The territorial governor has received some interesting information about his land speculation schemes. He may find it prudent to seek opportunities elsewhere. It was better than Eliza had dared hope. Not just survival, but triumph. Not just acceptance, but support. That evening, the entire ranch celebrated. The official recognition meant Kane couldn't touch them without bringing down territorial and possibly federal intervention. It meant funding for proper supplies, maybe even additional buildings. Most importantly, it meant the school would survive and grow. You did this, Jim told Eliza as they walked together in the evening cool. You created something special here. We did this, she corrected. I couldn't have done any of it without you. They were to be married at the end of the month, a simple ceremony at the ranch with Rosa fussing over every detail and the entire community invited. It wasn't the society wedding a Boston lady might have expected, but it was perfect for who Eliza had become. No regrets? Jim asked, as if reading her thoughts. About the life you left behind? That wasn't a life, Eliza said. It was an existence. This, the school, the ranch, you, this is living. Even with the threats and the heat and the isolation, especially with those things. They make the victories sweeter. Jim pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, hearing his heartbeat strong and steady. I love you, Eliza Carrington, soon-to-be Mercer. And I love you, Big Jim Mercer, though I still think it's a silly nickname. His laughter rumbled through his chest. Maybe our children will come up with a better one. Children? She pulled back to look at him. Already planning our family. Hoping, he admitted. Though I understand if you want to wait, with the school and everything. Jim, she interrupted, I'm 30 years old. If we're having children, we're not waiting. Is that so? That's so. He kissed her then, there in the desert twilight with the school they'd built together visible in the distance and their future spreading out before them like a promise. It hadn't been the journey she'd planned, but standing there in Jim's arms, Eliza knew it was exactly the journey she was meant to take. The desert had tested her, nearly broken her, but ultimately it had given her everything: purpose, community, love, and a home. The Circle M school would grow. She could see it clearly: more buildings, more teachers, hundreds of students over the years. Children who would grow up literate and capable because she'd refused to give up. Because Jim had stood beside her. Because a community had chosen unity over division. But that was the future. For now there was this moment, the man she loved, the home they'd built, and the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The wedding was set for a Saturday morning before the desert heat could become unbearable, but Kane struck on the Thursday before. Eliza woke not to birdsong, but to the acrid smell of smoke and the sound of Miguel shouting in rapid Spanish. This time it wasn't just a shed or a threat. The entire eastern pasture was ablaze, flames racing through the dry grass toward the main ranch buildings. Everyone up! Fire line at the creek! Jim's voice boomed across the compound as men stumbled from their bunks, pulling on boots and grabbing whatever tools they could find. Eliza threw on her dress and ran outside to find the sky glowing an ominous orange, smoke billowing like storm clouds. The school, she breathed, seeing the flames creeping closer to their newly built sanctuary. We'll save it, Jim said grimly, appearing at her side with his face already streaked with soot. But Eliza, this wasn't an accident. We found torch remains at 3 different points. Kane's making his move. Rosa appeared with wet blankets and started organizing the women and children. You know what to do, she told them in both English and Spanish. We've drilled this. Buckets from the well, wet down the roofs, keep the sparks from spreading. Eliza joined the bucket brigade. Her hands soon blistered from the rope handles, her dress soaked with water and sweat. Beside her, the Wilson sisters worked without complaint, and beyond them, the Mexican women who usually kept to themselves during ranch gatherings. The fire had erased all boundaries. They were simply people fighting to save their home. For hours they battled, the men creating fire breaks with shovels and controlled burns, the women keeping the buildings wet, everyone praying the wind wouldn't shift. Tom Wheeler collapsed from smoke inhalation and had to be dragged to safety. One of the younger vaqueros suffered burns trying to save the horses from a threatened stable. Just when it seemed the fire might overwhelm them, when Eliza's strength was failing and she could see exhaustion in every face around her, riders appeared on the horizon. Not more attackers, but help. Ranchers from neighboring spreads, the very people who'd been suspicious of the integrated school just months before. "Heard you had trouble," Jack Morrison from the double bar said simply, dismounting with a crew of his men. "Nobody burns out a neighbor on my watch." With the reinforcements, they finally got the fire under control as dawn broke over the devastated landscape. What had been green pasture was now black char. They'd lost 2 storage buildings, countless fences, and feed that would have to be replaced at considerable expense. But the house, the school, and most importantly, no lives had been lost. Jim stood surveying the damage, his jaw tight with controlled rage. "Get me a horse," he said quietly. "I'm going after Kane." "No." Judge Brennan's voice came from behind them. None of them had heard him ride up, but there he stood with a full complement of territorial marshals. "You're not going after anyone, Mr. Mercer. That's our job." "Judge," Jim started, but Brennan held up his hand. "We've been watching Kane for weeks, ever since Mrs. Whitman's visit. We suspected he might try something before your wedding, knowing it would unite the community even further. We have witnesses who saw him and his men setting the fires." "Then why didn't you stop them?" Eliza demanded, gesturing at the destruction. "We needed proof." "Now we have it. Kane and 6 of his men are already in custody. They'll stand trial for arson, attempted murder, and conspiracy to defraud the territory." The judge's expression was grim but satisfied. "He won't be troubling you again." The relief was overwhelming, but it was quickly replaced by the practical concerns of recovery. The wedding would have to be postponed. There was too much damage to repair, too many injured to tend to, or so Eliza thought until Rosa took charge. "The wedding happens as planned," she announced that evening as everyone gathered in the main house for supper. "We don't let that bastard Kane steal any more from us." "Rosa, look around," Jim said wearily. "Half the ranch is burned. We're exhausted." "And in 2 days we will still be exhausted and the ranch will still be burned," Rosa interrupted. "But you and Eliza will be married and we will celebrate that love conquers hate. The community defeats those who would divide us." "She's right," Tom Wheeler spoke up, his voice still raspy from smoke. "Pardon me for saying, boss, but if we postpone, it's like letting Kane win a little bit. I say we clean ourselves up and have the best damn wedding this territory's ever seen." A murmur of agreement ran through the assembled group. Miguel stood up. "The families, we already prepared food. It would be waste not to use it. And my sisters and I finished Mrs. Eliza's dress," one of the Wilson women added. "It's safe in our cottage." Eliza looked at Jim, seeing her own emotions reflected in his eyes. Exhaustion, yes, but also determination and love. "What do you think?" he asked her. "Want to get married in the middle of a disaster zone?" "I can't think of anything more appropriate for us," she replied, which drew laughter from everyone. So preparations continued alongside repairs. It was surreal, watching men haul burned timber with one hand while stringing wedding decorations with the other. The women divided their time between nursing the injured and cooking for the celebration. The children, resilient as always, turned it into a game, competing to see who could gather the most wildflowers from the unburned areas for bouquets. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cool, a blessing after the heat of the fire. Eliza stood in her room in the main house. She'd moved there after the fire for safety, while Rosa and the other women helped her dress. The gown was simple but beautiful, made from ivory silk that one of the rancher's wives had donated from her own wedding dress, remade to fit Eliza's taller frame. "You look beautiful, mija," Rosa said, tears in her eyes as she adjusted the veil. "Jim will forget his own name when he sees you." Through the window, Eliza could see the crowd gathering. It seemed like half the territory had come, drawn by word of the fire and the wedding that would happen despite it. The schoolhouse served as the backdrop, its walls still standing proud despite the black devastation surrounding it. Judge Brennan had agreed to perform the ceremony, giving it official weight that would matter in the territorial records. As Eliza walked toward Jim, escorted by Tom Wheeler who'd insisted on the honor, she saw the mix of faces watching, white and Mexican, ranchers and townspeople, even some Apache traders who'd come to see what the fuss was about. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a statement about the future they were building together. Jim stood waiting for her in his best suit, which still showed some singe marks from the fire. His face when he saw her was everything Rosa had predicted: wonder, love, and a momentary speechlessness that made several of the men chuckle. "Dearly beloved," Judge Brennan began, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, "we gather here in the shadow of destruction to celebrate creation, in the aftermath of hate to witness love, in the face of those who would divide us to unite two hearts, and through them, our community." It wasn't the traditional opening, but nothing about this was traditional. As they exchanged vows, Eliza could smell smoke still lingering in the air, could see the exhaustion in Jim's eyes, even as he promised to love and cherish her, could hear Luis Delgado translating for his grandmother in whispered Spanish. "I, James Samuel Mercer, take you, Eliza Ann Carrington, to be my wife," Jim said, his voice strong despite everything. "I promise to stand beside you against all threats, to support your dreams as my own, to learn from your courage and teach you my strength. I promise this before God and this community we've built together, in prosperity and adversity, in peace and conflict, until death parts us." Eliza's own vows came from her heart, unscripted despite Rosa's attempts to make her practice. "I, Eliza Ann Carrington, take you, James Samuel Mercer, to be my husband. You saved my life in the desert, but more than that, you gave me purpose. I promise to stand with you, to challenge you when you need challenging, to comfort you when you need comfort, to build with you a life and a legacy that honors both love and learning. I promise this with all that I am and all that I hope to be." When Judge Brennan pronounced them husband and wife, when Jim kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak, the cheer that went up could probably be heard in Tucson. But it was what happened next that Eliza would remember most clearly. Luis Delgado stepped forward with a piece of paper, clearly nervous. Senora Mercer," he said, stumbling over her new name. "We wrote something. All the students." He handed her the paper, and Eliza read it aloud, her voice breaking with emotion. "To our teacher who came from the desert, who opened our minds and our hearts, to Mr. Jim, who protected our school. Today you are married. Tomorrow we continue learning. Thank you for showing us that together we are stronger than those who would keep us apart." It was signed by every student, some with full names, some with just initials, some with simple X marks, but all representing commitment to the future they were building. The celebration that followed was unlike any wedding reception in Boston society. There were no carefully planned courses, no receiving lines, no proper protocol. Instead, there were tables groaning with food that represented every culture present. Rosa's tamales next to Mrs. Morrison's fried chicken, Apache fry bread alongside German strudel from the Hoffman family. Musicians played everything from Mexican folk songs to Irish jigs, and everyone danced with everyone else, propriety be damned. As the sun set, painting the scarred landscape in forgiving gold, Eliza found herself standing with Jim at the edge of the celebration, looking out at what remained of their eastern pasture. "We'll have to rebuild," Jim said quietly. "It'll take months, maybe years to fully recover." "We will rebuild," Eliza agreed. "But Jim, look." She gestured to the celebration behind them. 6 months ago, these people barely spoke to each other. Now they're dancing together, their children play together, they fought a fire together. That's what Cain never understood. He thought he could burn us out, but he only forged us stronger. Jim pulled her closer. "When I found you in that desert, I thought I was saving you. But you saved all of us, didn't you? Brought us together in a way I never could have." "We saved each other," Eliza said firmly. "That's what partners do." Their wedding night was spent not in romantic solitude, but helping tend the injured and organizing the cleanup efforts. It wasn't what most brides dreamed of, but when Jim finally carried her over the threshold of their room near dawn, both of them exhausted and still smelling faintly of smoke, Eliza couldn't imagine anything more perfect. They fell asleep holding each other, still fully clothed, as the sun rose on their first day as husband and wife. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. True to Judge Brennan's word, Kane stood trial and was sentenced to 5 years in territorial prison. His assets were seized and distributed among those he'd tried to defraud, providing some compensation for the damage he'd caused. Several of his men testified against him in exchange for lighter sentences, revealing a web of corruption that reached back to Eastern investors who quickly distanced themselves when the scandal broke. The school reopened within days of the wedding, the students determined not to lose momentum. Eliza taught with renewed energy, driven by the knowledge that education was more than just reading and writing. It was the foundation of the community they were building. The promised territorial funding arrived, along with something unexpected, a second teacher. Miss Catherine Hartley was young, barely 22, fresh from a teaching college in Philadelphia with high ideals and no frontier experience whatsoever. "I specifically requested to come here," she told Eliza on her first day, standing in the schoolhouse looking overwhelmed but determined. "I read about your integrated classroom in the newspapers. It's exactly the kind of progressive education I believe in." Eliza studied the young woman, seeing something of herself from months ago, the eagerness, the naivety, the conviction that education could change the world. "It won't be easy," she warned. "The students come from different backgrounds, different languages. Some have never held a pencil before." "I know," Catherine said. "That's why I'm here. To learn from you how to bridge those gaps." Having an assistant transformed what Eliza could accomplish. Catherine took over the beginning readers while Eliza worked with advanced students. They started a Sunday school for adults who couldn't attend during the week, and Catherine's youth and enthusiasm drew in teenagers who'd been hesitant before. One evening, about 2 months after the wedding, Eliza was closing up the schoolhouse when she felt the first wave of nausea. She gripped the desk, waiting for it to pass, but it only intensified. She barely made it outside before being violently ill. "Eliza?" Jim's voice came from behind her, concerned. He'd come to walk her home as he did every evening. "What's wrong?" "I don't know," she managed between heaves. "Something I ate, maybe?" But it wasn't something she ate. The nausea returned the next morning and the next. Rosa took one look at her and started laughing. "What's so funny?" Eliza demanded weakly. "Nothing funny, mija. Beautiful. You're carrying a child." The news hit Eliza like a lightning bolt. A baby. She and Jim were going to have a baby. The joy was immediately followed by fear. She'd seen what childbirth had done to Jim's first wife. "Don't think about that," Rosa said firmly, reading her expression. "Sarah had problems from the beginning. You're strong, healthy, you'll be fine." Jim's reaction when she told him that evening was everything she could have hoped for. His face lit up with pure joy before concern tempered it. "Are you happy?" he asked, holding her gently as if she might break. "Terrified," she admitted. "But yes, happy. So happy. We'll need to get the doctor out here regularly. Maybe you should stop teaching, rest more. James Mercer, if you try to wrap me in cotton for the next 7 months, I will make your life miserable," Eliza warned. "I'm pregnant, not dying." Women have been having babies while working since the beginning of time. But she did make some concessions. Catherine took over more of the physical aspects of teaching while Eliza focused on planning and the less strenuous activities. The students, when they found out, were collectively protective, with Luis appointing himself her official chair carrier and the older girls constantly bringing her water and checking if she needed anything. As her pregnancy progressed and her condition became obvious, Eliza expected some judgment, especially from the more conservative families. Instead, she found acceptance and even excitement. The baby would be born into their community, would grow up in the integrated world they were building. It was a symbol of the future they were creating. The school continued to grow. They added a small library with books donated from around the territory, and even some sent from educational societies in the East that had heard about their work. They started a newsletter, written and printed by the students themselves, sharing news between the ranches and creating another reason for everyone to learn to read. Then, in her 6th month of pregnancy, Trouble arrived in a different form. Eliza was teaching when she heard horses approaching, many horses, moving with military precision. Through the window, she saw a full cavalry unit entering the ranch compound, their blue uniforms dusty from travel. Jim met them in the yard, and Eliza could see the tension in his posture even from a distance. She dismissed her students early and walked out to join him, ignoring his gesture for her to stay back. "Colonel Morrison," Jim was saying as she approached, "what brings the Army to Circle M?" The colonel was a hard-faced man with cold eyes that swept over everything with calculating assessment. "Apache troubles, Mr. Mercer. There have been raids north of here. We're establishing a patrol base in the area." "There haven't been any Apache problems here," Jim said carefully. "We trade with them regularly." "That's exactly the problem." The colonel's voice was sharp. "Fraternizing with hostiles makes you sympathetic to them, possibly even supplying them." "Now wait just a minute, and this must be the famous Mrs. Mercer." The colonel turned to Eliza, his gaze lingering disapprovingly on her obvious pregnancy. "The teacher who's been educating savages alongside whites. Some in the territorial government think you're progressive. Others think you're dangerous." "Education is never dangerous, Colonel," Eliza said coolly. "Ignorance is." "Pretty words, ma'am. But when those educated Mexicans and Indians start thinking they're equal to white folks, when they start wanting the same rights and opportunities, what then? You're disrupting the natural order." "The only natural order I recognize is the one where all children have the right to learn," Eliza replied. The colonel's face reddened. "Mr. Mercer, I strongly suggest you reconsider your policies here. The Army will be watching. Any sign of Apache collaboration, any indication that this ranch is harboring hostiles or sympathizers, and we'll take action." "Is that a threat?" Jim asked quietly. "It's a warning." "Good day." The cavalry unit made camp just outside the ranch boundaries, close enough to be a constant presence, a reminder that they were being watched. It changed the atmosphere immediately. The Apache traders stopped coming. Some of the Mexican families started keeping their children home from school, afraid of drawing military attention. "We can't let them destroy what we've built," Eliza said that night, pacing despite her exhaustion. "We won't," Jim promised, "but we have to be careful. The Army has the authority to shut us down if they find any excuse." They were careful, but it didn't matter. The colonel was determined to find problems. He complained that the integrated school was a security risk. He suggested that some of the Mexican workers were actually Apache sympathizers. He even implied that Jim's marriage to a radical Eastern woman had compromised his judgment. The situation came to a head when a group of Apache, mainly women and children, appeared at the ranch seeking help. Their band had been attacked by soldiers, the men killed or scattered, and they were starving. "We have to help them," Eliza said immediately. "If we do and the Army finds out, they'll arrest us for harboring hostiles," Jim warned. "Then we don't let them find out." They hid the Apache families in the old mine shaft on the northern edge of the property, bringing them food and medical supplies under cover of darkness. Rosa and several of the Mexican women who had connections to the Apache through trade, and in some cases, blood, tended to the wounded. For 3 days they managed to keep the secret. Then Colonel Morrison arrived with his full unit. "We've had reports of Apache being hidden here," he announced. "We're searching the property." "You have no right," Jim started. "I have every right." "This is a matter of territorial security." The colonel smiled coldly. "Unless you have something to hide." They searched methodically, soldiers spreading across the ranch like locusts. Eliza stood with Jim, her hand pressed to her swollen belly, praying the Apache had heard the commotion and hidden themselves deeper in the mine. But prayers weren't enough. A shout went up from the north, and soldiers began converging on the mine entrance. "No," Eliza breathed, starting forward, but Jim caught her arm. "Don't. It'll only make things worse." They could only watch as the Apache were dragged out, 3 women, 5 children, and an old man who could barely walk. The soldiers were rough, using more force than necessary, and when one of the children cried out in fear, his mother tried to comfort him and was struck with a rifle butt for her efforts. "Stop!" Eliza shouted, pulling free from Jim and moving forward before he could stop her. "They're not combatants. They're refugees. They're hostiles, ma'am," the colonel said coldly, "and you've been harboring them." "That's treason." "It's humanity," Eliza shot back. Something you seem to have forgotten. The colonel's face darkened. Mr. Mercer, control your wife or I'll arrest her for interference with military operations. Try it, Jim said, moving to stand beside Eliza. Arrest a pregnant school teacher for defending women and children. See how that plays in the newspapers back east. For a moment, the standoff held, tension crackling like lightning about to strike. Then another voice cut through. Colonel Morrison, what exactly is happening here? Everyone turned to see Judge Brennan approaching with Mrs. Whitman, and surprisingly, a man in an expensive suit who looked decidedly out of place on the frontier. Judge, the colonel said stiffly, we're apprehending hostile Apache hidden on this property. I see women and children, Judge Brennan observed. Hardly a war party. The law is clear. The law is subject to interpretation, the man in the suit interrupted. Senator James Hartwell, Colonel. Territorial Committee on Indian Affairs. I'm here to investigate reports of military overreach in civilian areas. The colonel's jaw tightened. Senator, I wasn't aware. That was the point, Senator Hartwell said dryly. He looked at the Apache families, then at Eliza and Jim. Mrs. Mercer, I've heard a great deal about your school. Would you say these Apache pose a threat to your students? The only threat here is ignorance and fear, Eliza said clearly. These people came seeking help. We gave it, as any Christian should. Harboring hostiles is a crime, the colonel insisted. Harboring refugees is an act of conscience, the senator countered. Colonel, release these people immediately. Sir, I must protest. Protest all you like from your new posting. You're being transferred, effective immediately. Your replacement will arrive within the week. The colonel's face went from red to white. You can't. I can, and I have. The Army's role is to protect citizens, not terrorize them. You've overstepped your authority, Colonel. Be grateful I'm only transferring you and not court-martialing you. As the soldiers reluctantly released the Apache, the senator approached Jim and Eliza. Mrs. Whitman wrote to me about your work here, he said. The territory needs more integration, not less. More education, not ignorance. What you're doing here is a model for the future. He paused, looking at Eliza's pregnant form with a slight smile. Though perhaps you should consider taking some rest, Mrs. Mercer. You look ready to deliver at any moment. Not for another month, Senator, Eliza said, though she was exhausted from the confrontation. Well, when the child comes, he or she will be born into a better world because of what you've built here. He turned to address the gathered crowd, his voice carrying. Let it be known that the Circle M School and all who learn and teach here are under federal protection. Anyone who threatens this institution or its people will answer to the full authority of the United States government. As the senator departed with Judge Brennan and Mrs. Whitman, taking the humiliated colonel with them, the ranch erupted in celebration. The Apache were tended to properly. The school bells rang in triumph, and for the first time in weeks, the shadow of military threat lifted. That night, as Jim held Eliza close in their bed, feeling the baby kick between them, he whispered, You're going to get us killed one of these days, with that fearlessness of yours. Or save us all, she whispered back. It's hard to tell sometimes. That's the truth of it, he agreed, kissing her forehead. But I wouldn't have you any other way. The new military commander who arrived the following week was a Captain Hayes, a younger man who seemed more interested in keeping peace than causing trouble. He made it clear that as long as the ranch caused no problems, he would cause none either. It was the best they could hope for. Life settled back into its rhythm, though Eliza found the final month of pregnancy more challenging than she'd expected. Her ankles swelled, her back ached constantly, and she could barely manage the walk to the schoolhouse. But she refused to stop teaching entirely, conducting lessons from a chair when necessary, letting Catherine handle the more active parts. Then, on a particularly hot afternoon in late September, as she was explaining the principles of democracy to her advanced students, a lesson that had taken on new meaning after recent events, she felt the first contraction. Mrs. Mercer. Catherine noticed her expression. Are you all right? I think, Eliza said carefully, that class might need to end early today. The baby wasn't willing to wait for careful plans. By the time they got her to the main house, the contractions were coming fast and hard. Rosa took charge immediately, banishing Jim from the room despite his protests. This is women's work, she said firmly. You go wear a hole in the floor outside. For hours Eliza labored, Rosa and the midwife attending her while what seemed like half the ranch gathered outside. She could hear Jim pacing, could hear Tom Wheeler trying to distract him with talk of cattle prices, could hear her students singing songs they'd learned in both English and Spanish. They sing for the baby, Rosa told her during a brief respite between contractions. To welcome it into our community. The pain was worse than anything Eliza had experienced, worse than the desert heat, worse than the fear of fire. But then, just as dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded her of her first morning at the Circle M, she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. A girl, Rosa announced, placing the squalling infant on Eliza's chest, perfect and healthy, and with her father's stubborn chin. Jim was allowed in then, and the look on his face when he saw his daughter made every moment of pain worth it. He knelt beside the bed, one finger gently touching the baby's tiny fist. She's beautiful, he whispered, tears running unashamed down his cheeks. What should we name her? Eliza looked at their daughter, this child born from love forged in adversity, who would grow up in the integrated community they'd built, who would know no boundaries of race or class because her parents had refused to accept them. Hope, she said. Hope Sarah Mercer. Hope, Jim repeated, and the baby opened her eyes at the sound of his voice, seeming to look right at him. Perfect. The entire ranch seemed to exhale with relief at Hope's safe arrival, but the celebration was short-lived. 3 days after the birth, while Eliza was still recovering, a rider came thundering into the compound with news that changed everything. Telegraph from Tucson, he gasped, handing the message to Jim. There's been a cave-in at the Copper Crown mine. 40 men trapped, maybe more. Jim's face went white as he read. The Copper Crown was 60 miles south, but half the trapped miners had family on the Circle M or attending the school. Miguel's brother, Tom Wheeler's nephew, countless cousins and friends of their community. We have to help, Jim said immediately, but Eliza could see the conflict in his eyes as he looked at her and their newborn daughter. Go, she told him from her bed, though every instinct screamed to keep him close. Take whoever you need. We'll manage here. Eliza, you just gave birth, and those men might die if you don't help. Go, Jim. Rosa and Catherine will take care of Hope and me. He kissed her fiercely, then their daughter gently, and within an hour, half the ranch's men were riding south with rescue equipment. What should have been Eliza's peaceful recovery became a tense vigil as the women and children left behind waited for news. Catherine stepped up remarkably, keeping the school running while also helping with Hope. The students organized their own support system, the older ones teaching the younger, everyone pulling together in the way crisis had taught them to do. On the 4th day, Rosa was changing Hope's swaddling when she noticed something that made her breath catch. Eliza, she said carefully, the baby, her color is not right. Eliza's heart stopped as she looked at her daughter. Hope's skin had a faint yellow tinge, and she'd been fussier than usual, not nursing well. Jaundice. She'd seen it before in Boston. Sometimes it was harmless, clearing on its own. Sometimes... We need the doctor, Eliza said, trying to keep panic from her voice. But Doc Winters was at the mine collapse, along with every other medical person within 100 miles. They were alone. I know some things, Maria, one of the Mexican women, said quietly. She'd been training with Doc Winters informally, learning herbs and healing. My grandmother was a curandera. There are ways. In Boston, Eliza would have been horrified at the suggestion of folk medicine for her baby, but this wasn't Boston, and they didn't have choices. What do we do? Maria had them place Hope in indirect sunlight, not the harsh desert blaze, but filtered through thin cloth. She made teas from specific plants that she had Eliza drink to pass through her milk. She showed them how to massage the baby gently to help her system process what it couldn't handle alone. For 2 days, they fought Hope's jaundice with every piece of knowledge they had, traditional and modern combined. The yellow deepened before it began to fade, and there were hours when Hope barely cried, too weak to protest. Eliza didn't sleep, couldn't sleep, just held her daughter and prayed to any power that might listen. On the 6th day, 2 miracles happened. Hope's color returned to healthy pink, her cries becoming strong again, and Jim returned with the rescued miners. Not all of them, but more than anyone had hoped to save. 28 men pulled from the darkness, including Miguel's brother and Tom's nephew. When Jim saw his daughter healthy in Eliza's arms, he broke down completely, falling to his knees beside the bed and sobbing with relief. I thought, when I got Rosa's message about the jaundice, I almost left them to come back. But you didn't, Eliza said, touching his face. You saved those men. While you saved our daughter. Maria saved her, and Rosa, and the knowledge of grandmothers I'll never meet. She looked up at the women gathered around, Mexican and white together. We all saved her. It was a moment that crystallized something for Eliza. The school wasn't just about reading and writing. It was about preserving and sharing all knowledge, whether it came from books or tradition, from universities or from generations of wisdom passed down through families. We need to expand the school, she said suddenly. Not just basic education. We need to teach everything, traditional medicine alongside modern, Spanish and English, the history of all our peoples. Eliza, you just had a baby, and she just recovered from jaundice, Jim said gently. Maybe rest first? But the idea had taken hold. As she recovered and hope grew stronger, Eliza began planning. She brought in the older Mexican women to teach traditional crafts and healing. She had the Apache, when they felt safe enough to visit, share their knowledge of the desert, which plants were food and which were medicine. She had the ranch hands teach practical skills, how to read brands, how to figure accounts, how to write contracts that couldn't be twisted against them. The school evolved from a simple classroom into something unprecedented, a true center of multicultural learning. The territorial government took notice, and not entirely favorably. The new challenge arrived in the form of Superintendent Wallace, a thin, austere man who appeared one morning with a stack of regulations and a disapproving expression. Mrs. Mercer, he said, looking around the schoolhouse where Maria was teaching herbal medicine to one group while Catherine led another in reading Shakespeare, this is highly irregular. Education often is, Eliza replied, shifting hope to her other hip. She'd taken to bringing the baby to school, creating a small nursery area where other mothers could also tend their young children while learning. The territorial board has standards, approved curricula. You can't just teach whatever this is. This is practical education for frontier life, Eliza said firmly. My students can read and write, certainly, but they can also treat snakebite, calculate fair wages, understand their legal rights, and communicate across language barriers. Which would you rather have in a frontier citizen? Wallace pulled out his regulations. The law requires specific subjects taught in specific ways. Then the law is wrong. The voice came from behind them. Senator Hartwell had returned, this time with several other officials. I've been observing for the past hour, Superintendent. This is exactly what the territory needs. Senator, with respect, there must be standards. There must be results, the senator corrected. And the results here are extraordinary. Mrs. Mercer, would you be willing to demonstrate your teaching methods to a territorial education committee? We're looking to reform the entire system. Eliza felt Jim's hand on her shoulder, steady and supportive. I'd be honored, Senator. When? Next month. We'll bring the committee here, show them what integrated, practical education looks like. The preparation for the committee visit consumed the next weeks. Every student threw themselves into the effort, wanting to prove that their school, their way of learning, was valid. Even little Luis, now 10 and one of her star pupils, stayed after class to help organize demonstrations. Senora Mercer, he said one evening as she prepared materials with Hope sleeping in a basket beside her, if they close our school, where would we go? They won't close it, Eliza assured him, though she wasn't as certain as she sounded. But if they did... She looked at this boy who'd been the first to write his name on her board, who now read fluently in 2 languages and helped teach the younger children. Then we'd build another one, and another after that if necessary. Once you learn something, Luis, no one can take it away from you. The building might close, but the education remains. The day of the committee visit dawned with unusual clouds on the horizon, the smell of rain in the air. The desert was going to put on a show, one way or another. The committee consisted of 5 members, 3 men who looked skeptical and 2 women who seemed more open-minded. They sat in the back of the classroom as Eliza began the day's lessons, trying to ignore their presence and teach as naturally as possible. The morning started with integrated reading groups, older students helping younger, languages mixing as needed. One of the committee members frowned when Spanish explanation helped an English-speaking student understand a concept, but Eliza pressed on. Then came mathematics, but practical mathematics, calculating water rights, figuring feed costs, understanding interest rates that affected loans. Tom Wheeler, now able to read and figure, stood at the board explaining how understanding numbers had saved him from a predatory contract. "This is all very practical," one committee member interrupted. "But what about culture? Literature? The fine arts?" Catherine stepped forward with her Shakespeare group. But they didn't just recite. They performed. Mexican students playing English nobles, white students as Italian lovers, the universal themes crossing all boundaries. Even the skeptical committee members leaned forward, engaged despite themselves. Lunch was communal, as always, and Eliza made sure the committee ate with the students and their families. Let them see the community that education had built, the conversations between people who wouldn't have spoken a year ago. The afternoon brought Maria's medicine class, and one committee member objected strongly. "This is superstition, not education." "Is it?" Eliza asked. "Maria, please explain the willow bark preparation." Maria, nervous but determined, explained in accented but clear English how willow bark tea reduced fever and pain. "The old ones knew this for generations," she said. "Now modern doctors make aspirin from the same tree. Traditional knowledge and modern science, they meet." Doc Winters, who'd returned from the mine disaster and had started attending Maria's classes himself, stood up. "I've been practicing medicine for 20 years, he said. "Half of what this woman knows would benefit any medical college. Dismissing traditional knowledge because of who holds it is ignorance, not education." The storm that had been building all day finally broke as the committee prepared to deliberate. Rain pounded on the roof, rare and precious, and the students rushed to put out containers to catch it. But the roof, still damaged from the fire months ago, began to leak. Without hesitation, without anyone organizing them, the entire school community sprang into action. Students, parents, and teachers worked together, moving supplies, protecting books, some climbing onto the roof despite the rain to patch the worst leaks. The committee watched in amazement as this diverse group functioned as one unit, each person knowing their role, helping regardless of language or background. When the crisis passed and everyone was back inside, soaked but laughing, the lead committee member stood up. He was an older man named Harrison, who'd been the most skeptical throughout the day. "I came here," he said slowly, "expecting to find chaos. Mixed classes, unapproved curricula, a teacher who barely recovered from childbirth trying to change the world." He paused, looking around the room. "Instead, I found the future. This is what America should be. Not separate but equal, but truly integrated, truly united." One of the women on the committee nodded enthusiastically. "The territorial board needs to see this. No, the whole country needs to see this." "Mrs. Mercer," Harrison continued, "would you be willing to write a comprehensive guide to your teaching methods? Something other frontier schools could follow?" Eliza looked at Jim, who nodded encouragingly, then at Hope sleeping peacefully despite the chaos, then at her students, her extended family, really. "I'll do better than that," she said. "We'll write it together. Each student, each teacher, each family contributing their perspective. It won't just be about method, it'll be about community." The committee departed with promises of funding and support, but more importantly, with changed minds. The Circle M School would not only survive, but become a model. That evening, as the desert celebrated the rare rain with blooming night flowers and the fresh smell of wet earth, the entire ranch gathered for an impromptu celebration. Someone brought out instruments, and soon music filled the night. Jim danced with Eliza while Rosa held Hope, the baby mesmerized by the lantern light and laughter. "We did it," Jim murmured in her ear. "You did it." "We all did it," she corrected, but allowed herself a moment of pride. From dying in the desert to this, a school that was changing how the territory thought about education, a community that proved integration was possible, a family she'd never dreamed she'd have. But challenges weren't finished with them. 2 weeks later, a different sort of visitor arrived, a woman in expensive Eastern clothes with a familiar face that made Eliza's blood run cold. "Hello, cousin," Charlotte Whitman said, her Boston accent sharp as winter ice. "Imagine my surprise to learn you were alive and apparently reformed as some sort of frontier teacher." Charlotte had tormented Eliza throughout their childhood, always pointing out how Eliza's branch of the family had fallen, how charity cases like her should be grateful for any attention from their betters. Now she stood in the Circle M schoolhouse, looking around with barely concealed disgust. "Charlotte," Eliza managed, "what are you doing here?" "Father's investing in territorial railways. I came to oversee our interests and heard the most remarkable tale about a cousin I thought had disappeared in shame." Her smile was cruel. "Teaching savages and marrying a rancher. How the mighty have fallen." Jim stepped forward, but Eliza caught his arm. This was her battle. "I teach anyone willing to learn," Eliza said calmly, "and I married a man worth 10 of the Boston society fops you always chased." Charlotte's face flushed. "You always were too proud for your station. But this," she gestured at the classroom, "this is beneath even you. Mixed races, teaching folklore as fact. What would your poor parents think?" "They'd be proud," Eliza said firmly. They believed in education for everyone, in judging people by their character, not their birth. Values you never understood. "I understand that you're destroying the natural order, that you're giving these people ideas above their station." Charlotte's voice rose. "And I understand that Father's railway investment gives us considerable influence with the territorial government. One word from me. One word from you, and what?" Senator Hartwell entered the schoolhouse, having arrived for a follow-up visit at exactly the right moment. "Please continue, Miss Charlotte Whitman. My father is Charles Whitman of Whitman Rails." "Yes, I know. I also know your father just lost the railway contract because of questionable financial practices. Something about bribing officials?" The senator's smile was cold. "Perhaps you should return to Boston and help with his legal troubles rather than threatening territorial institutions under federal protection." Charlotte went white, then red, then fled without another word. But as her carriage pulled away, Eliza knew she hadn't seen the last of her cousin's spite. The next attack came through the mail, letters to newspapers in Boston and New York, signed by concerned citizens, describing the Circle M school as a den of racial mixing and moral corruption. Charlotte's work, obviously, but effective. Soon curious journalists arrived to see this scandalous school for themselves. "This could destroy us," Jim worried, reading the latest inflammatory article. "Or make us," Eliza countered. "We show them the truth. Let them see what we've really built." The first journalist was Harold Morrison from Harper's Weekly, a man who arrived expecting sensation and found something else entirely. He spent a week observing, interviewing, participating. When Tom Wheeler taught him to calculate water rights while barely able to read a year ago, when Maria's traditional medicine possibly saved his horse from colic, when he saw former enemies working side by side, his perspective shifted. His article, when it appeared, was titled "The Frontier of the Future: How One School is Redefining American Education." It described not scandal, but hope, not corruption, but community. Other journalists followed, and while some wrote negative pieces, more were won over by what they saw. The school became famous, or infamous depending on perspective. Letters arrived from around the country, some filled with hate, others with donations and support. Teachers wrote asking to come study their methods. Parents inquired about sending their children. Through it all, hope grew, taking her first steps in the schoolhouse while her mother taught, saying her first words in a mix of English and Spanish that made everyone laugh. She was the living symbol of what they were building, a child who would grow up seeing no barriers between peoples, who would carry their integrated future forward. One evening, as Eliza nursed hope while reviewing the next day's lessons, Jim sat beside her with a concerned expression. "There's something you should know," he said quietly. "Kane's been released early. Good behavior, apparently, though I suspect money changed hands." Eliza's blood chilled. "Will he come back?" "Captain Hayes has men watching for him. And we're not the same vulnerable ranch we were. We have federal protection, territorial support, a whole community ready to defend us." But he's not the type to forgive or forget. No, Jim agreed. He's not. Kane's return manifested not in direct attack, but in subtle sabotage. Wells on neighboring ranches went bad, forcing them to sell water rights. Supply wagons heading to the Circle M were robbed. Parents received anonymous threats about sending their children to the school, but the community had learned strength. When wells went bad, the Circle M shared its water. When supplies were stolen, everyone contributed what they could. When threats came, parents walked their children to school in groups, daring anyone to try something. The confrontation came at the worst possible time. Eliza was teaching a special session on constitutional rights, something that had become more important as their students faced various forms of discrimination, when Kane walked into the schoolhouse. He looked older, harder, prison having carved harsh lines into his face. Several men flanked him, hands resting on gun butts. "Mrs. Mercer," he said with mock politeness. "Still corrupting young minds, I see." "Mr. Kane, you're trespassing." "Am I?" "This schoolhouse sits on what was once public land. I filed a claim stating the transfer to private ownership was illegal." Eliza's heart sank. If he'd found some legal technicality... "Interesting theory," Judge Brennan said from the doorway, where he'd appeared with Captain Hayes and several soldiers. "Except the land was properly transferred through territorial authority, which I personally oversaw." "Your claim is worthless, Kane." "We'll see what higher courts say." "We will indeed. But until then, you're under arrest for violating the terms of your parole by coming within a mile of the Circle M." Kane's face twisted with rage. "You think you've won? You think this changes anything? The natural order will reassert itself. Your precious integrated school will fail, and..." His speech was cut short by Luis Delgado stepping forward. The boy, now 11, stood straight and spoke clearly. "Mr. Kane, you say natural order, but I study nature with Senora Mercer. In nature, diversity makes systems stronger. Monocultures fail. Integration survives." The simple wisdom from a child's mouth seemed to break something in Kane. He looked around at the students, Mexican, white, even some Apache children now, all standing together, unified in their defiance of his worldview. "Take him away," Judge Brennan ordered, and Kane was led out, somehow smaller than when he'd entered. But the threat of his legal challenge remained. If he could find a sympathetic judge, if he could exploit some technicality, everything they'd built could crumble. "We need to make the school independent of land ownership," Eliza said that night as they discussed options. "Something that exists regardless of who owns what." "A trust," Jim suggested. "Put the school into a trust that exists independent of the ranch." It was brilliant. They worked with Judge Brennan and sympathetic lawyers to create the Circle M Educational Trust, with a board drawn from all communities, Mexican, white, Apache, anyone who had children in the school. The trust would own the school buildings and the land they sat on, making it immune to individual land disputes. The signing ceremony became another celebration, another proof that community could overcome individual greed. Even Charlotte's continued attempts to discredit them through Eastern newspapers couldn't diminish the achievement. As autumn came to the desert, painting the mountains in different shades of brown and gold, Eliza stood in her schoolhouse watching her students work. Hope played in the corner, toddling between desks, beloved by all. Catherine was teaching advanced literature to one group while Maria led others in traditional weaving. Outside, Jim was working with the older boys on construction. They were building another room for the school, demand having outgrown space again. Tom Wheeler approached her desk, holding a letter carefully. "Mrs. C, I wrote to my brother back in Ohio. Told him about the school, about learning to read at my age. He wants to come visit, maybe stay. Says if I can learn, maybe he can too." "Of course he can, Tom. There's always room for more students." "The thing is," Tom hesitated, "he married a Cherokee woman. They got 3 kids, mixed blood kids. Would they be welcome?" Eliza looked at her classroom, Luis helping a new white student with pronunciation, the Wilson sisters teaching an Apache girl to write her name, everyone mixed and mingling like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Tom, if they want to learn, they're welcome. That's the only requirement here." Tom's weathered face broke into a smile. "I'll write 'em tonight." Tell him to come quick before winter. As Tom walked away, Eliza reflected on how far they'd all come. The school that had started as a simple literacy program had become something revolutionary, a proof that America's future didn't have to be segregated, that education could unite rather than divide. But more than that, it had given her everything she'd never dared dream of. A husband who loved and supported her, a daughter who would grow up in a better world, a purpose that mattered, and a family that extended far beyond blood. The desert had tested her, nearly killed her, but ultimately transformed her. Elizabeth Carrington, the desperate spinster from Boston, had become Eliza Mercer, teacher, mother, and architect of change. A commotion outside drew her attention. Riders were approaching, many riders, and for a moment the old fear returned. But then she heard singing. Her students who'd gone to compete in the territorial spelling bee were returning, and from their joy, she knew they'd won. She stepped onto the porch with hope in her arms, watching as the students dismounted, waving a trophy and all talking at once. Jim appeared beside her, his arm going around her waist. "Listen to them," he said softly. "Mexican kids, white kids, all celebrating together. You did that." "We did that," she corrected, as she always did. "Mama, down!" Hope demanded, wanting to join the celebration. Eliza set her daughter on the ground and watched her toddle toward the mixed group of children, who immediately included her in their celebration, lifting her up and passing her around like the precious treasure she was. This was the future. Not perfect, still facing challenges, but bright with possibility. The Circle M school would continue to grow, to influence other schools, to prove that integration and education could transform the frontier. But that was tomorrow's work. Today was for celebration, for community, for the joy of children who'd proven themselves against schools that had never imagined they could compete. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in impossible colors, Eliza stood surrounded by her students, her family, her community, and knew that every hardship had been worth it for this moment, this life, this future they were building together. The victory at the spelling bee should have been pure triumph, but within a week, disturbing news arrived that cast shadows over their celebration. The federal government, under pressure from various interests, was considering new legislation that would mandate separate schools for different races. The very foundation of everything they'd built was under threat, not from local prejudice, but from the highest levels of power. "They can't do this," Catherine said, pacing the schoolhouse after reading the proposed legislation. "We've proven integration works. The children who competed, they won against segregated schools. They can and they will, unless we stop them," Eliza replied, bouncing Hope on her knee while her mind raced through possibilities. The toddler had been fussy all morning, perhaps sensing the tension. "We need allies, testimonies, evidence that can't be ignored." Jim entered with Judge Brennan and Senator Hartwell, their faces grim. "It's worse than we thought," the senator said without preamble. "There's a consortium of interests pushing this. Railway companies wanting cheaper labor kept ignorant, land speculators like Keynes Associates, even some religious groups claiming mixing races goes against divine plan." "Divine plan!" Rosa scoffed from where she was preparing lunch for the students. "God makes all children innocent. Men make them separate." "The hearing is in 3 weeks in Washington," Judge Brennan added. "They're fast-tracking it before opposition can organize." Eliza stood, her decision immediate. "Then I go to Washington." "Eliza, no," Jim protested. "Hope's too young for such a journey, and you can't leave her." "Then she comes with me." "Jim, if we don't fight this now, there won't be a school for her to grow up in. Everything we've built will be destroyed legally this time." The room fell silent except for Hope's babbling. She'd started stringing words together lately, a mixture of languages that perfectly embodied what they were fighting for. "I'll go with you," Catherine said firmly, "and we should take some of the students. Let them see what they're trying to destroy." "Luis," Eliza said immediately, "and Mary Wilson, and Joseph Crowfeather from the Apache families." Different backgrounds, all brilliant, all products of integrated education. Tom Wheeler cleared his throat. "Begging your pardon, Mrs. C., but might be good to have someone like me along too. Show them it ain't just children learning, but grown folks who never had a chance before." And so the delegation was formed. Jim would stay to run the ranch and protect what they'd built, while Eliza would take their case to the Capitol. The community rallied. raising funds for the journey, preparing statements, gathering evidence of the school's success. The night before departure, Jim held Eliza close in their bed, Hope sleeping between them as had become her habit when she sensed distress. "I'm scared," Eliza admitted in the darkness. "Not of failing, but of what success might cost. We're making enemies, powerful ones." "You could stop," Jim said softly. "We could just teach our local children, stay quiet, hope they forget about us." "Could you?" she asked. "Could you watch Luis be forced into a separate school? Watch the Apache children barred from education? Watch everything we've built crumble and do nothing?" "No," he admitted, "but I had to offer. A husband supposed to protect his wife, and here I am sending you into battle." "We protect each other," Eliza reminded him. "That's what partners do." The journey east was a revelation for the students. Luis had never been farther than Tucson, and his eyes widened at each new sight. Mary Wilson, usually confident, grew quiet as they moved through territories where signs read, "No Mexicans or Indians." Joseph Crow Feather, barely 13 but wise beyond his years, observed everything with careful attention. Catherine had arranged for them to stay with sympathetic families along the way, people who'd read about the Circle M school and supported their mission. Each stop became an opportunity to share their story, to show what integrated education could accomplish. In Kansas City, they were invited to speak at a church. Eliza watched with pride as Luis explained in perfect English how learning to read had opened worlds to him, then switched to Spanish to include the Mexican workers who'd gathered outside to listen through windows. Mary recited Shakespeare, then taught the audience a traditional Mexican song she'd learned from her classmates. Joseph demonstrated mathematical principles using both Western methods and Apache counting systems. "These children are remarkable," the minister said afterward, "but surely they're exceptions." "They're only exceptional because they were given opportunity," Eliza replied. "Every child has this potential. We've simply proven it." Tom Wheeler's testimony was perhaps most powerful. The grizzled ranch hand stood before the sophisticated audience and spoke simply. "I worked 40 years not knowing my own worth because I couldn't read what I was signing. Mrs. Mercer taught me my letters, and now I help run the Circle M's accounts. If an old fool like me can learn, anyone can. But it happened because we learned together, helping each other. You separate us, you lose that." They gathered letters of support from everyone they met, building a portfolio of evidence. But Eliza knew their real challenge waited in Washington. The Capitol was overwhelming in its grandeur and its indifference. Officials who'd seemed supportive in letters were suddenly unavailable. Appointments were canceled, rescheduled, canceled again. They'd been in the city 3 days, money running low, when unexpected help arrived. "Mrs. Mercer." The woman's voice was familiar but impossible. Eliza turned to find Charlotte Whitman in the hotel lobby, but transformed. Gone was the cruel superiority, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "Charlotte, come to gloat?" "Come to help, actually." Charlotte's laugh was bitter. "Father's in prison. The scandal destroyed us. Everything I believed about natural superiority, about breeding and station, it was all lies. The inferior people I scorned are the ones who showed me kindness when I had nothing." Eliza studied her cousin, searching for deception, but found only exhausted sincerity. "I work for Congressman Phillips now," Charlotte continued, "as a secretary. It's honest work, which is more than Father ever did. I heard about your hearing. I can get you in to see people who matter." "Why would you help us?" "Because I was wrong about everything, and because maybe helping you succeed can begin to atone for the harm I tried to cause." Charlotte paused, glancing at Hope, who was playing with a rag doll Rosa had made. "She's beautiful. Growing up in the world you're building instead of the one I was taught to preserve." It was Charlotte who got them into Congressman Phillips' office. Charlotte who arranged meetings with key committee members. Charlotte who used her knowledge of society to open doors that would have remained closed. The hearing itself was held in a grand chamber that echoed with every footstep. The committee sat elevated above them, 5 men who held the future of education in their hands. The opposition presented first, carefully selected experts who spoke of the dangers of mixing races, the importance of separate development, the natural order that God intended. Cain was there, Eliza noticed, sitting with the opposition, his presence a reminder that their enemies never truly disappeared. Then it was their turn. Eliza had prepared a lengthy speech about educational theory and constitutional rights, but standing before the committee, hope on her hip, because the child had refused to be left with strangers, she abandoned it. "Gentlemen," she began, "I could speak of pedagogy and progress, but instead, let me show you the future." She nodded to Luis, who stood and began to speak. He told his story simply. A Mexican boy who'd learned to read and now helped teach others. He solved complex mathematical problems on the provided board. He recited the preamble to the Constitution in accented but clear English, then translated it to Spanish for the Mexican journalists present. Mary Wilson followed, reading from her own composition about attending school with children she'd been taught to fear, only to find friends. She spoke of learning Spanish lullabies and teaching English hymns, of sharing food and stories and dreams. Joseph Crow Feather spoke last of the students, his voice carrying the dignity of his people. "You fear us learning together will weaken America," he said, "but America is already many peoples. We make it stronger by understanding each other. At Circle M, I learn your history and teach mine. Both matter." Tom Wheeler stood next, his testimony bringing several committee members to lean forward with interest. Here was a white man, a real American in their eyes, testifying that learning alongside Mexicans and Indians had enriched, not diminished him. Catherine presented the academic results, test scores, literacy rates, the spelling bee victory. She showed letters from other schools asking to learn their methods, from parents begging to send their children. Finally, Eliza spoke, hope still in her arms. "This child," she said, "speaks her first words in 3 languages. She sees no difference between her Mexican playmates and her white ones. She's learning to read from Apache picture stories and English primers alike. This is the America we're building at Circle M, not separate but equal, but united and stronger." "Pretty words, Mrs. Mercer," one committee member said dismissively. "But surely you understand the races have different capacities. Your experiment might work in a small school, but applied broadly." Before Eliza could respond, Hope squirmed in her arms and spoke clearly. "No," she said, her small voice echoing in the chamber. Then, looking directly at the man who'd spoken, she added in perfect Spanish, "Todos somos iguales." We are all equal, words she'd learned from playing with Luis's little sister. The chamber fell silent. This toddler, this product of integrated education, had just demonstrated what they were trying to legislate against. "From the mouths of babes," Senator Hartwell said into the silence. He'd come to support them, using his influence to ensure a fair hearing. "Gentlemen, we're not here to debate whether integration can work. These people have proven it does. We're here to decide whether America will embrace its future or cling to a past that never truly existed." The committee recessed for deliberation. Eliza and her delegation waited in the anteroom, tension mounting with each passing hour. Charlotte brought them food, stayed with them despite having no official role. "Whatever happens," she told Eliza quietly, "you've already won. You've changed minds, including mine." When the committee reconvened, the chairman stood slowly. "By a vote of 3-2, he announced, this committee recommends against the proposed mandatory segregation in territorial schools. Furthermore, we recommend the Circle M school model be studied for potential wider implementation." The celebration was restrained in the chamber but exploded outside. Luis hugged Mary Wilson, Tom Wheeler actually cried, and Hope, caught up in the joy, laughed and clapped her hands. But Kane approached as they left the building, his face twisted with fury. "This isn't over," he hissed at Eliza. "You've won a battle, not the war. There are other ways to destroy what you've built." "Mr. Kane," Charlotte stepped between them, surprising everyone, "I believe there are several warrants for your arrest in various territories. Shall I alert the authorities you're here?" Kane paled and retreated, but his threat lingered. The journey home was triumphant but exhausting. At every stop, people wanted to hear about the hearing, about the school that had challenged federal policy and won. Churches offered donations, teachers asked about positions, families inquired about moving to the area. But it was the telegram waiting at their last stop that changed everything. Jim's terse words sent cold fear through Eliza. "Come quickly." Fire again. Rosa hurt. School stands but barely. They raced the final miles, arriving to find the Circle M in organized chaos. The school had been attacked while they were gone. Not burned this time, but vandalized, windows broken, books destroyed, and worst of all, Rosa had been injured trying to stop the attackers. Eliza found her in bed, bandaged and pale, but alert. "I'm fine, mija," Rosa said immediately. "But they destroyed so much. The books, the children's work." "We'll replace them," Eliza said, though she didn't know how. Their funds were depleted from the journey, and the ranch had suffered losses from suspicious cattle deaths. "It was Kane's men," Jim told her privately. "We can't prove it, but everyone knows. He's trying to break us financially since he couldn't do it legally." That night, holding Hope close while the child slept, Eliza felt despair creeping in. They'd won in Washington, but what good was that if they couldn't keep the school running? The answer came from unexpected sources. Tom Wheeler's brother arrived from Ohio with his Cherokee wife and mixed children, but also with something else, a wagon full of books donated by Ohio schools that had heard about Circle M. The Wilson sisters' aunt in California sent money. Joseph Crow Feather's Apache band, usually suspicious of white institutions, brought horses to sell, donating the proceeds to the school that had welcomed their children. Most surprisingly, a package arrived from Boston with no return address. Inside was a substantial bank draft and a note. "For the education of all children, regardless of birth, C.W." Charlotte's final gesture of atonement before disappearing into anonymity. With the donations, they not only rebuilt, but expanded. They added a library, a proper science room, quarters for boarding students from distant ranches. The attack that was meant to destroy them had instead rallied support from across the country. Luis, inspired by the Washington trip, started a student newspaper. Mary Wilson organized a drama club that performed plays mixing all their cultural traditions. Joseph Crow Feather began teaching younger Apache children who'd been afraid to come before, showing them they could keep their identity while gaining new knowledge. On Hope's second birthday, the entire community gathered for a celebration that was also a statement. The school was fuller than ever, with over 60 regular students and more arriving weekly. Catherine had recruited 2 more teachers, one a freed slave from Texas who brought her own perspective on the importance of education, another a Chinese immigrant who'd been barred from teaching in California schools. "We're becoming what America claims to be," Eliza told Jim that night as they watched Hope play with children of every background imaginable. "A true melting pot, but one where ingredients keep their flavor while creating something new together." But even in triumph, challenges persisted. Rosa, though recovered, moved slower, her injury having taken its toll. Jim struggled with ranch finances, trying to support the ever-growing school while maintaining the cattle operation. And Kane, though not seen, was felt, a shadow always threatening from the edges. The breaking point came during the autumn roundup. Jim had taken most of the men to gather the herd for market, the sale crucial for keeping both ranch and school afloat. That's when Kane struck. Not at the school this time, but at the very foundation of their lives. Eliza was teaching when she saw the smoke, not from a building, but from the range. The grasslands that fed the cattle were burning. Without that grass, the cattle would starve. Without the cattle, the ranch would fail. Without the ranch, the school had no protection. "Everyone out," she commanded, her teacher's voice cutting through panic. "Older students, help the younger. Catherine, take Hope." She ran toward the fire, joined by every able-bodied person from the ranch. But the fire was massive, set at multiple points with accelerants that made it burn faster and hotter than natural flame. "It's no use," Miguel said, coughing from smoke. "It burns too fast." "Then we save what we can," Eliza declared. "Create a fire break at the creek. Save the winter pasture at least." They worked through the night, teachers and students, mothers and children, everyone who could hold a tool. When Jim and the men returned, racing back at the sight of smoke, they found their families had saved a third of the range, enough to survive on, barely. Kane appeared the next morning, not hiding his involvement this time. "Sell to me," he said simply. "I'll give you fair price for the ranch, enough to start over somewhere else. Otherwise, I'll keep coming. You can't watch everything all the time." "Get off my land," Jim said quietly, dangerously. "Think about it, Mercer. Your wife, your child. Accidents happen on the frontier. It was the wrong thing to say. Before Jim could move, Eliza stepped forward and slapped Kane hard enough to knock his hat off. "You threaten my child again," she said, her voice carrying to everyone gathered. "And I'll kill you myself." "That's not a threat, Mr. Kane. It's a promise from a mother who's already survived everything you've thrown at us." Kane raised his hand as if to strike back, but suddenly found himself surrounded, not just by Jim and the ranch hands, but by the students' parents, the Apache traders who'd been visiting, even some townspeople who'd come to help fight the fire. "You should leave," Judge Brennan said, appearing from the crowd. "And Mr. Kane?" "I've been researching that early release you received. Seems the judge who signed it received a rather large deposit shortly after. Federal marshals are very interested in that coincidence." Kane's face went from red to white. Without another word, he mounted his horse and rode away. They'd later learn he'd fled to Mexico, finally understanding that his war against the Circle M was unwinnable. But the damage was done. The ranch was crippled, barely able to support itself, much less the growing school. They needed a miracle. It came in the form of an unexpected visitor, Theodore Roosevelt himself, not yet president but already a force in American politics. He'd heard about the Circle M school and came to see for himself. "By God," he said, watching the integrated classroom at work, "this is the most American thing I've ever seen. Different peoples working together, lifting each other up. This is what will make us a great nation." His endorsement, published in newspapers nationwide, brought a flood of support. Donations, volunteers, and most importantly, a contract from the territorial government to provide beef for military posts at premium prices, specifically from the Circle M in recognition of their contribution to education. The ranch was saved, the school secured, and their future finally seemed bright. 5 years passed. Hope grew into a bright, fearless child who spoke 3 languages and could ride before she could properly write. The school had expanded to 3 buildings with 6 teachers and over 100 students. Luis had gone to college, the first from their school, on a scholarship Roosevelt himself had arranged. Mary Wilson was studying to become a teacher. Joseph Crow Feather had started a program teaching Apache culture and language, preserving traditions while embracing modern education. Tom Wheeler, now in his 60s, had not only learned to read but had become the school's librarian, carefully tending books he once couldn't understand. Rosa, though slowed by age and her old injury, still ruled the kitchen and the hearts of everyone at Circle M. Catherine had married a young doctor who'd come to study Maria's traditional medicine, and they'd started a clinic attached to the school. Maria herself had become a certified nurse, the first Mexican woman in the territory to achieve that distinction. On a warm spring evening, Eliza stood where she'd stood that first day, looking out over the Circle M, but now seeing not just a ranch but a community. Children played in the courtyard, white, Mexican, Apache, Chinese, Negro, and combinations of all, their laughter the sound of the future being born. "Mama, look!" Hope called, running up with a paper. "I wrote a story in all 3 languages." Eliza knelt to read her daughter's work, marveling at the neat letters, the confident switching between tongues, the story itself about children from different worlds becoming friends. "It's beautiful, my love. Mrs. Wilson says I could be a writer someday, or a teacher like you, or maybe both." "You can be anything," Eliza told her daughter. "That's what we built here, a place where anyone can become anything." Jim appeared, older now, with silver dominating his hair, but still strong, still the man who'd saved her from the desert. "Senator Hartwell's here," he said. "Wants to talk about making the Circle M model mandatory for all territorial schools." Mandatory? Eliza stood, brushing dust from her skirts. "We can't force integration, Jim. It has to be chosen, embraced. Then let's go tell him that." As they walked toward the house, Hope running ahead to greet the senator she'd charmed as a baby in Washington, Eliza reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She'd left Boston with nothing but desperate hope. She'd nearly died in the desert. She'd faced fire, prejudice, violence, and political opposition. But she'd also found love, purpose, family, and proof that America could be what it promised, a place where all people were created equal, where education could break down barriers, where community could triumph over division. The Circle M school stood as testament to that possibility, its bells ringing across the desert, calling children of all backgrounds to learn together, to grow together, to build together the America that could be. You did it, Jim said softly, taking her hand. We did it, she corrected, as always. No, he said, stopping to face her. We helped, we supported, we protected. But you, Eliza Mercer, you had the vision and the courage to make it real. You changed the world. Just a small piece of it. All world changing starts small, he replied, kissing her forehead. One student, one classroom, one community at a time. As they entered the house where Senator Hartwell waited, where Rosa was undoubtedly preparing too much food, where their daughter played with children who would grow up to reshape the American West, Eliza knew the work wasn't finished. There would be more challenges, more opposition, more fights to fight. But standing there, surrounded by the fruit of their labors, she also knew they would win. Not because they were stronger or richer or more powerful than their opponents, but because they had something unbeatable, proof that integration worked, that education transformed, that love conquered fear. The desert had tested her with death and delivered her to life. Now she would spend that life ensuring others had the same chance at transformation, the same opportunity to become more than circumstances dictated. The Circle M School would continue long after she was gone, its lessons spreading like seeds on the desert wind, taking root in unlikely places, growing into forests of possibility. But that was the future. For now there was this moment, her husband's hand in hers, her daughter's laughter echoing through the house, her students' voices raised in song as the day's lessons ended, and the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The desert sunset painted the sky in impossible colors, just as it had that first day when Jim had found her dying in the sand. But now she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving and bringing everyone around her along for the journey. This was her legacy. Not just a school, but a proof of possibility, a demonstration that the American dream could belong to everyone if they were brave enough to claim it together.